Hello and welcome. I'm Marianne Fessenden from AMTS, and this is the Nutritionist Webinar. Thank you for joining us for our 6th year. We're doing something a little different this season. We're taking it outside. This month we are joined by the delightful and multilingual Dr. Phil Cardoso. Dr. Cardoso is an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He received his DVM and MS degrees from the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil and his PhD from the University of Illinois. Since 2012, Cardoso has established a unique program that seamlessly blends his teaching, extension, and research efforts. Phil's topic today will be feeding for cow and calf success in the transition period, a behind-the-scenes view. A couple notes about this recording. In a few places, the cold weather presented a particular challenge. It was recorded in March in Illinois, and it was very cold. In general, because of the extreme cold conditions when Phil was filming, the wind eliminating mic did not work. I dropped in subtitles for those short sections. In the sections that just showed activity but little to no narration, I sped up the playback. Questions and responses will follow after the presentation.
Hi guys, I'm Phil Cardoso. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Illinois. And I have some results to share with you about our, during the transition period on nutrition, impacts on reproduction and health as well. But this seminar, Marianne requested me, hey, can we show something that what's going on the farm, right? So I thought it was a great idea to show you how we get that research done, right? So what are the control points? What are the things that we really make sure happen in every trial to make sure we can really tell treatments apart and then be confident in telling you the results from that research. And I think a lot of the things you're going to see here, they apply in commercial farms. So if you are a nutritionist or a farmer, manager, whatever aspect that you are in the dairy industry, I think this information is going to be relevant for you as well. So let's get into it. Before we get into the data, I have to thank all the grad students. In our group, they are the ones that really put a lot of effort to make sure all these things happen. So thank you to all the grad students involved in these research projects and all the grad students still to come to our group. We are always recruiting students and we have tons of projects. So feel free to contact me if that's something you'd like to see more or know more about how we do the research and how we put things out there. One thing to get started with is a little game for you guys, right? So here in the US, right, if you think about it, perhaps that same thing happened in your country. Let's see. What is your generic term for a sweetened carbonated beverage? So whatever that guy is drinking, right, and that hand is opening, how do you call that? And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to think about it. Think in your mind. How do you call that? Okay. So one thing that happened here in the US, and actually that was a research project, is that they saw that actually people, they call that totally different, right? So some people around the St. Louis area, they would call that soda. So, hey, go get and give me a soda. However, if you go to Texas, especially Dallas, that's going to be called a Coke. Doesn't matter if you're ordering a Pepsi or if you're ordering Mountain Dew, they're going to say, hey, just give me a Coke, right? And usually, perhaps more around the Chicago area, you're going to see people saying pop. Hey, give me a pop, right? My point being here is that you're going to see in different regions in our country here in the US, you call the same thing different names, right? And I think that that's relevant, right? Because, for example, when I was learning English back then in Brazil, I was taught, hey, you call it soft drink. But guess what? It seems like nobody here calls soft drink. So it's kind of why, it's just coming here and then really living here that you start figure out that people call the same thing different names, and you just have to adapt. And I think that translates a little bit to what I want to talk today here, right? So when I talk about these things called control energy diets, anionic diet, or negative decad, amino acids, sometimes we have different names for the same thing, but more often we are talking about different things and we are calling the same, right? So we need really to clarify. If I just pop on my mind and I do like a cloud word map, right? And I put all that, that's all the words that come into mind when you're talking about those three strategies. You know, if I'm talking about control energy diet, are you telling me it's a low energy, or you're just adding straw? What's the deal there? When you talk about anionic or negative decad, how low? What is urine pH? How much calcium? Are we talking the same thing, right? And then amino acids. Are you talking about a relationship with energy? You're just throwing grams of it. How many amino acids you're talking about? So we need to make sure that when we engage in these discussions that we are talking about the same thing, right? So I'm going to make an effort to really tell you, hey, this is what I'm calling this, okay? And this is up for debate and we can talk more, but make sure when you are referring to something that you really connect to that nutritionist, to that farmer, that you are speaking the same language in the sense of, the characteristics of that strategy, right? So you've seen me showing this before, right? And I keep showing this and I keep saying, hey, it's just going back to the farm and say, hey, what do we need? What do we need from this cow? And that's what most people want. They want minimized health disorders. They want a lot of production, and they want cows to get pregnant again. So those strategies, I would argue that they should give you those three things. And we should be able to tell you if they are going to do that or not, right? And that's because we know there is a period of negative energy balance during the transition period. There is this period of negative protein balance. And we could discuss there is this whole period of negative nutrient balance, even though we don't understand very well, water being a nutrient, if that is also a negative water intake or water balance. And actually it could be something very interesting. I mean, it's well known for all the quiz bowls that, water is the most neglected nutrient in a dairy farm. And I think we didn't pay too much attention to that in the transition period. We hope that we always have water. However, we are not sure if cows are anyhow affected by their water intake. So something interesting for the future, perhaps. This is how we believe a TMR should look like in the prepartum. So this is a high straw control energy diet, if you want to call it. But more than that, what I propose is that we say this, the TMR, the feed that the cow is eating, that is going to be a prescription for all the three things that we want. So this is going to be a prescription for her to get healthy, for her to get pregnant and produce a lot of milk. So what are the things that we need to have in this nutrient to give the cow the health that is needed? So imagine that you get sick, you go to the doctor, you get a prescription, right? Let's try to invert that. Let's try to get through our meals, right? That would actually work for humans as well, not just cows, right? What are the things I need to have in my diet so I don't need to go to the doctor, or I can at least postpone that visit to the doctor to the furthest that I can, right? So I think that's one very important thing. What are the things I need to have in the TMR so I can get it as a prescription to my cow to be healthy, instead of doing the opposite, go and treat the cow. So what is the right diet? We're going to talk about it. What is the right diet? And actually, we publish a review paper on it, so we can go more in depth if we have any more questions about it, right? There's a lot of more information and good discussion with combining with other literature. So it's out there. Feel free to check it out. But how we get to the paper, that's our point here, is to show you the behind the scenes, right? What's happening? What are we doing when you're publishing that paper? How does it get done, right? So this is what we recommend to be the diet for a dry cow. We're going to talk about far off and close up period in a minute. But how about if we just go and look a little bit to a video to check it out, how we get things done here in Illinois.
Lisette is driving that tractor. Here she is. The first amount is going to be wheat straw. Say hi, Lisette. Okay. So you're going to collect some samples now?
I'm gonna collect, yes.
Okay.
Straw for now.
Here's the bobcat that she's going to be using, getting in there to collect. Here it is. One thing, very important. So she's collecting some samples now, but you can see the pre-chopped straw. So you can see here, try to see the size. You can see you have particle sizes of perhaps, what?
5.
No, because look at this one.
One of them. And then
Look at this. Just measure that one.
This.
So you're gonna see something around 2
2.
to 3 centimeters in inches. Just turn the tape. What is that gonna be? So you have everything pre-chopped to less than
0.5.
2 inches. So it's gonna be 0.5 to 1 inch, you think? Let's say you can see the bigger ones there. Try to measure these bigger ones here.
This one.
Yeah. So maybe 1.5 inch
2.
in centimeters. That would be super magic.
About
4,
5.
5.
Yeah.
So between, let's say, 2 to 5 centimeters. So here you can see that's the commodity Chad. So we usually get samples of straw every week, just to make sure we are getting the right amount of potassium and we know the right dry matter of that straw, and that's pretty consistent. Again, this is wheat straw. So that's something also that is going to happen. Lisette will collect our little samples of our corn gluten feed. That's how it comes for us. Stays here at the commodity shed as well. Right, you guys can see here. So Lisette and her little baggies are gonna collect that. And here it is. The tractor just waiting to be loaded with that. And these are the beautiful champagne, you can see it. We have some straws. Drop them when it's needed. And here you can see all the bags. You can see the bag that we are on now, corn silage. It's this one. Here's the corn silage. The yellow corn silage used. You can see, again, remind it's pretty cold today. Here it is. You can have an idea on particle size, and you see lots of grain. Doesn't seem to have a lot of those grains, full grains. I think it seems like all the kernels, they're at least damaged. So again, this is going for that corn silage. Lisette is adding some canola meal. So far we got straw, we got the grain mix, we got canola meal. Canola meal is coming from that pile over there. Right. Now it's when all the ingredients are in there. Actually, Lisette has a little baggie with the grain mix that we collect for analysis every week. She's gonna lock the scale, right? And now we're gonna drive the tractor and the mixer to where the dry cows are. Lisette now unlocks the scale and she's gonna see how much water does she need to add to the mix. Remember the straw? That's the water coming out. We're gonna check later in that diet how much water we need to put. She's checking the scale and then she has to run and shut off the water. A few seconds later. Lots of training involved in that. So now Lisette start mixing. So here, as you can see, you have the counting gates, and now what has happened, you can see each board, it's corresponding to one cow, right? So this is the place for 9486. She's in a control. Same thing is happening with this cow, 9462. You see this cow, 9472. She's just waiting for her feed. You can see that little ball on her neck, and that what allows, when she comes closer to this gate, to open the gate just specific to her and not to everyone else. So actually, she's in CR treatment right here, and that's the place, right? And again, we have no feed at this moment because the leftover feed from yesterday was just weighted, and it is waiting now to bring the rest of the feed to be fed, right? So that's how we do it. So we collect how much they left over, the orts, and then we deliver new feed. You can see the students there, they're just waiting to finish the mixing inside the kina. That is going for 5 minutes at this point. We check that with the TMR, with the Penn State box, and that's loaded into the J-Lore. We're gonna check soon. You have some of the cows, right? And you can see that perhaps they have, some of them, a little bit more body composition score that we would want. They are in a freestall. Freestall. Better the sand, you can see. And then whenever calving is about to happen, they can be moved to this maternity pen. So here we have 6 cows in this pen. We can have up to 10 cows, right? And then once they calve, they move to the next pen. That's going to be also a cow gate where we can now feed the lactating diet. That's that cow over there. So you can see here, 9462, coming to say hi. Very friendly cows. Again, we are dealing with these cows every day. Really interested in the camera. Really interested in the camera. If you want to talk about fecal scores, right? These cows here, dry cows. That's what we have for fecal scores. So you can see fecal score 3.5 or 4. Good consistency. Okay, here is the hay buster. So that's how we every so often chop all that straw. So you can have your settings there.
Coming back to our diet recommendations for dry cows, let's talk a little bit about the energy and kind of the diet, the specifics of the diet you guys just saw, right? So one thing that we know from previous research is that when we compare a control energy diet, right, in comparison with a high energy diet before calving, that feeding the high energy diet, those cows are going to have more chances of developing DA and more chances of developing ketosis as well. So overall, for health, working on that control energy diet should be beneficial for the cow. The other thing that we were able to figure out as well is that when we fed a control energy diet before calving, cows had improved, or at least the same, right? The difference was there's 10 days. Reproductive success here measured by days to pregnancy. And so that control energy diet provided some improved, or at least did not bother cows getting pregnant after calving. That's all things that we already know, right? And again, lots of some papers out there that you guys can read about it. The other thing is about milk production. So how about milk yield after calving? And here in this specific trial, the paper I just showed you in the previous slide, milk yield is the same for all treatments. Doesn't matter what that cow had, if it was a control energy diet or a high energy diet. So it's not statistically different in this paper where we combine 7 trials to have a bigger number of cows, like we had 400 and something cows. Okay, so no difference in milk from our work here in Illinois. Another work that we're trying to assess is energy concentration before calving and impact on production. This work was done by Sabine Mann from Tom Overton's group at that time, both from Cornell now. What they fed was a control energy diet, right? An intermediate energy diet and a high energy diet. And here you can see the amounts that they have of corn silage and with straw. So as expected as you increased the amount of wheat straw, right? Or as you reduce the amount of wheat straw, that's kind of how you're changing the amount of that energy concentration. And here I'm giving you in pounds of as fat. I'm giving you here how much they were feeding that to cows, right? And what the results were that, again, they didn't find any difference in milk yield or energy corrected milk. The only thing that there was different was there was a tendency for a treatment difference in butter fat concentration in milk on those cows. Seems like as you increased the amount of energy prepartum, you also kind of increase the amount of butter fat after calving. And remember that some of that, especially here, results from early lactation from week 1 to 6, could indicate they didn't do fatty acids analysis in that milk butter fat, but that could indicate actually lipid mobilization from those cows and not being a good thing, right? So again, we had this research in Illinois, and now we're talking about the research in Cornell, pretty much coming up to the same indication. Now, more recently, there's a paper from Jim Drakely and one of his PhD students that is in Pennsylvania now teaching, Bruce Richards. And what they found, what they're trying to check was, hey, do you need to feed, can I feed control energy for the whole dry period, the 60 days? Do I need to do a steam up? So they were playing with that stages of the dry period. And actually, I had some very good discussion with Jim and Bruce about this paper. And this is something we call the Dairy Focus Papercast. So there's roughly a 1 hour chat among us that's on YouTube. You can log into our website, and then you can find there in our YouTube channel. You're going to see that. You can also listen on the podcast. So we go more in depth on the reasons and the thoughts on why, and we try to match with some literature as well. But let's dive into the results, what they found, right? So like I said, they had a treatment called low, where they have wheat straw, and we had the high. There was the whole dry period with a more energetic diet. And then we have this low plus high. That means they started low from 60 to 21 days. And then the last 3 weeks, our close-up period, then they went to the high, right? So it's kind of the intermediate from that Cornell, but not, right? Just a different strategy here where we go the whole far off. And one of the things, again, we come back on milk yield, there was not different. And there was a difference for fat-corrected milk, where as you had that increased energy before calving, you had more fat-corrected milk, and you had, of course, more fat concentration. And here they also capture some differences in lactose in milk. But again, there was no analysis on the fatty acids in the milk. We could question on, is this actually something positive, right? Or we are just demanding too much from the cow, too much lipolysis from adipose tissue. And that's why from that previous work that I showed you, cows that eat the high energy diet before calving, they end up with more chances of developing ketosis, right? So this is kind of the same story, just showing to you on milk, right? So I think it's important, as the more we can try to show some of those fatty acids analysis, we can try to pinpoint, this is a short chain, long chain, is it a mix? So we can determine if this is coming from adipose tissue or not, right? And one thing they did was to analyze total lipid and triacylglycerol in liver. So they had biopsies, and it's just like a little scale, right? You have the low energy here, the intermediate, and then you have the high energy, where you can see at those 10 days after calving, they really show that little scale, right? So again, on that whole hypothesis, right, since we don't have the fatty acids and in the milk, if you have increased adipose tissue lipolysis in the cow, you're probably going to see more adipose tissue coming through the liver, and that's what you see here. and that's probably not a very good thing, right? We know a lot of the issues with cows having to extrapolate or to export that lipid from the liver, and so that goes along where probably the control energy diet, and here again, fed throughout that whole dry period, 60 days. If at your farm they're doing it at 50 days or 45 days, that can probably be a good strategy for your farm as well. Again, this is how it looks like. The TMR, I already showed you, that's not this, right? So adding straw to a diet or controlling the energy by adding straw is not just throwing straw to the cow, right? A big problem is the sorting. That's the number one problem that we have in any control energy diet system where we have the sorting. And the best way that we found here in Illinois, and we really recommend, is that farmers, they have to have a way to chop that straw, right? So here you can see a hay buster, and that's chopping the straw. So then you can go to the commodity shed and just grab that with your skid steer, as you saw in the video, and then fed to cows with very well controlled particle size, right? So this is very important. Perhaps if we don't have ability to do this, depending on the mixer that we have, it's better not even to try to go this route, okay? So you guys remember in the past, there was a whole promotion of got milk, right? Hey, the promotion board would do that. Let's stimulate people to get milk. Let's hire Wolverine or Tom Brady's wife. Actually, she's from Brazil, Giselle. And let's just promote that. And actually, I think we found our guide or our best promoter of chopped straw. And if you guys know Dr. Tom Overton from Cornell here, not just straw, but the promotion of got chopped straw, right? So we need to make sure that cows are eating our TMR and they are not sorting. So let's get chopped straw. I'm still waiting on that t-shirt. I don't have it, but I agree with the idea. And I agree with having Dr. Overton promoting that all over the world. So you need to get some funding from the checkoff to promote that as well. And actually, all the things that we talk about, the recommendations for our drive for years and years, now we have 3 very interesting papers from Travis de Vries from Guelph talking about, again, if you see it, they're talking about a high straw diet, right? So we're not even talking about control energy diet. So that's where we need to bring back to the same idea here, right? But what he's talking about is, hey, what should be the length, right? Does that really matter? What should be the moisture content of that TMR with the straw, with the control energy diet? And what happens if we add actually something that is molasses based, a little bit more sugar, actually in a liquid form, right? So you can even have that wetness or not being as dry. And guess what? Here, the long versus short was 10 versus 2.5 centimeters. I'm giving you there an idea in inches, all right? So yes, if it is short, 2.5, cows ate more and they perform better than if it was long. Moisture content at 45% dry matter, they ate better, performed better than if it was a 53. Again, you should add water to that diet to bring it down to a good dry matter, especially in the summer. Another thing hopefully we're going to be able to talk more about it during our question session, but remember, if your farm, they don't have a cover where they're feeding, especially in the summer, you're feeding that TMR, maybe in a few hours, that water evaporated and the dry matter that you have perhaps in the morning is not the same that you have at noon or at 2 p.m. So you better check on that variation. Is that a problem for you? You may have to feed twice a day, or that's where you need to check on investments and facilities, perhaps, to give that better approach. But that's something that is sometimes forgotten, that, hey, I have my dry matter, it's good, but actually after a few hours, are you sure it's still good? I think it's always worth exploring. If it is covered, then there is not such a big deal, right? But with this dry diets, because it's a dry straw, you have to check for the dry matter, and actually adding 1 kilo of molasses on a dry matter basis actually improved fermentation and improved probably microbial protein. I mean, they didn't access directly, but you can have that. So a lot of papers talking about, hey, having some more, this shorter straw, very well chopped, having that water there, controlling the dry matter of the TMR, and also controlling the amount of sugar to make sure that you have a better fermentation of the fiber components of your diet. It's something good to add on. So very good that we have that scientific knowledge now register for us. And I'm just sharing, very happy to see those 3 papers. One thing to watch out is how do we check? So like I even showed there, they passed through a screen and said, it's kind of a little bit different than telling you what is the particle size, right? You just say, hey, I use a screen, but the variation you had that could be a little bit different, right? So we can talk more about that. There are ways for you to determine the average particle size that you have in a feed, but you'd have more sieves and you have to go through some formula calculations, but you can do that. We do that with corn and other things, right? One thing on the Penn State box that I'm going to show you how important it is to have those numbers. Make sure, right, you're using the 4 sieves. You're not using those 3 sieves anymore. If you want to use it, no big deal, but you just don't have additional information with it. And within the 4 sieves, make sure you know the last sieve, how big those pores are, okay? Here I'm showing you a 1.18 millimeter sieve or 0.046 inches. Is very thin screen, but it's gonna give you different results, okay? So make sure you know what is the sieve. The normal one that you can see in videos, most likely in our video, it's a 4 millimeter one, okay? And this is so important, actually. We were getting results different and farmers saying, hey, my bottom pan, I have 30%, the other one would have 10%. I say, what's this huge difference? Guess what? They were using different systems, right? Different sieves on the Penn State box, Penn State shaker box, if you will. And actually, we have a newsletter. You can go to our website and you can read about it. But actually, if you calculate physically effective NDF using a 4 millimeter or using a 1.18 millimeter, you're going to have totally different results, okay? So we go over here and we make the comparisons. We have the production data of the cows. We have the wet chemistry for that TMR after and all the components that go through the sieves. And we say, hey, if you're talking about physically effective fiber, you may want to go with the 4 millimeter sieve. So first of all, make sure you know. I requested to put this tape here so people really know what they are shaking and they're reporting the results accordingly. So talking about Penn State shaker box, let's see how this looks like at the farm for that diet that we just mixed.
Here we go, getting ready for the Penn State box. This is the form that we use where you can rapidly write your results. And let's see, one thing it's important is to know that this is a 4 sieve Penn State box, right? So we have this upper sieve and this second sieve. And here is one thing that you really have to watch out, because some sieves are going to have the 1.18 millimeters, and here that's why we write that, hey, this is the 4 millimeter sieve, and of course the one in the bottom is the same. One thing as well is to make sure that the amount of material that you're putting the top is adequate to the amount of sieves or amount of shaking you're going to do, right? So if you put too much here and you're going to do your 40 shakes, that may not be sufficient to make out the material going down through the sieves. So how much you're going to put, Lisette, there?
150
grams. So 150 grams, that's what we usually like to start. Let's see how it stays in the top. So this one is the dry cow TMR. Right. All right. And let's see how it shakes. You almost don't need gloves here. It's so warm.
Yeah, but it helps better with the shaking.
Oh, see, so you don't have calluses.
Yeah, last time it definitely cut here.
That's a good idea. So here you go. That's Lizette's suggestion. Get a glove for the shaking. A very professional scoop to mix things. You can use that for popcorn as well. At the movie theater, that's where we got. It's a little bit lighter, this material. So you guys are gonna see the volume be a little bit bigger, larger, heavier. I just did it there. You guys can see the material a little bit different. But changing everything. Okay.
61.
It's going to be probably a big part of your straw. If not chopped correctly, it's going to stay more on the top in there. And definitely, if you're not chopping it right, you can see very little of this pen. Big one rinse. Second round here.
This one is 53 grams.
Okay. Hey, Carney, looking to the air. I'm sorry, Carney. Carney was doing her makeup.
grams.
32 grams. Cool.
So guys, one topic that I want to bring to you is that why should we do, or why should we control some things at the farm, and why should we not control some things at the farm? How should we decide what to follow up every week or every 2 weeks or twice a week? How do we go about that? And again, coming back to this perspective of the nutritional strategies, especially during the transition period, right? So one thing I want to bring to you is this. Imagine, for example, that I have, what is the variation in crude protein, right, in corn or corn silage, okay? So you're getting corn in your grain mix, or you're getting corn in your corn silage. But let's say corn from in your grain mix, right? So if I would say that that has a normal distribution, right, that would have an average, right? And this little thing here, remember, this is what we are going to call the standard deviation, right? So it's that how we spread out is that number around. So I'll say that corn crude protein, it would look like that, right? But now let me say that I'm now talking about dry matter, right? So here, for example, the crude protein, this would be, let's say, 7.8%, and you're going to go from 7.5 or 7.3 until some 8.3, something like that, right? Now, if I'm talking about the dry matter of your corn silage, okay, so then you're going to have probably a curve that is going to look like this, okay? So this would be the mean that you have. So let's say on average, your corn silage, so dry matter, corn silage. On average, your corn silage will be, I don't know, 36%. However, it could go to 43% or it could come to 26%. It doesn't matter. The matter is that, your standard deviation, it's going to be much larger than the protein in the corn. Okay, so my point is that we should check dry matter every week, depending on how much is it changing and how we were able to make the back then when you harvest that crop, what was happening. So one of the things and one of the best things that the nutritionist, I think, can do is identify farm by farm what are those points that are giving large distribution or large variation or a higher standard deviation, right? And those processes, they need to be controlled to understand and also to improve. So imagine that my dry matter of forages are changing very drastically. I may want to do twice a week or even every day, depending, right? In our farm, we do every week. But depending on some challenges that we may have when we were harvesting, we may want to have it that more frequent. But now I'm talking about this. We have a hay buster to chop all the straw that goes into the diet. But imagine that in your farm or some farms, they don't have that ability and they use another process to chop that straw or that forage, and they may require to have something better, or you're going to have to check more to make sure it's in the right fit. If it's not, you have to adjust the diet. So those are the moments to make sure you are tracking the results, right? Because if we don't check this and adjust, then your results are not going to be okay. So one of the things that we can come now, it's to the competition environment. So let's say if in one competition, we are working on having as much done in the rower, right, to row, or jumping rope, or into burpees, right? And you have to do as many as you can for 10 minutes, something very common in CrossFit, for example. If I understand that in the rower, people usually can row well, and the variation is very tiny, from the worst rower to the best rower, the change is very minimum. But on burpees and jumping ropes, there is a larger variation. So if I just go by in the rower and I make sure I'm saving my energy there, and then I put a lot of time and effort and energy on doing very well the jumping rope and the burpees, I'm probably going to do better in that workout as a whole. So it's the same thing at the farm. Identifying for that farm specific, that's why it needs to be somebody going at the farm. Very hard to do it from abroad or from the telephone, right? You need to be there and understand what are the cases of variations that you guys have to control. So what you're seeing here in the videos and some of the things we're talking about, it's identifying some of those points, and we want to control that to make sure the cows are well fed consistently, and that if there's any deviation, that we can work it out. So let me share with you how we track some of those things, right? So let me share with you here. Okay. So here, what you can see here is our Excel, and then pretty much what we have is the dry matter of all the dry matters of all the forages and everything else, right? So you can see, for example, that for that day that we recorded the mix, that was the 14th, you can see that our corn silage was at 34%. 1 week later, our corn silage was at 33.4. And we like to track which bag is coming from. So we use those silage bags. So it's just another item that we can go for. And whenever it's changing, we can try to adjust for that. But again, our TMR from close-up, that one we mixed was at 48%, and the fresh diet at 46. The next week, the TMR close-up was at 44, and the fresh diet at 46. So very far away from that 54 that the research said is a big thing. We usually like to be below 50% of our TMRs, and that's very important, especially in the summer. That's not the case right here, right? So that's for dry matter. The other thing that I think it's important also is to follow the Penn State shaker box. So we have this thing here where the student, right? We are here at the Penn State box. So this is for a close-up. So we always highlight, hey, we are using the 4 millimeter sieve. Remember, we had that conversation. But then what they're doing is that they are doing 3 times shaking that, like you saw. Then we have an average, and then we play that into percentages, and that's what you can see here in the graphs, right? And then we do that every. So for that TMR that we are mixing on the 14th, right? You can see the graph here, the upper at 7%, 44% in the middle. Usually we recommend those top 2 to be around 50%. That's a good indication. And then you have the third, and then the bottom 24. So we don't want a lot of stuff in the bottom. That could be too many fines, right? So we want to keep it between 30 and 40%. I have in the top there. And usually, yeah, I have here. This is how much time, 5 minutes, they are mixing that in the wagon. So we may adjust that according to results here, right? You may think it's 3 minutes. It may be too little. You have too much in the top, so you go and you mix a little bit more, and then we got the 5 minutes. So you can see let's go back to the 14th again. So you are between the 30 and 40%, 24, it's fine as well. But one thing that I want to highlight here, you may have noticed that the student, Lisette, right? She was shaking, and you say, wow, she's not shaking very strong, right? And one of the things is actually, if you go back to the Penn State University and you go to Judd Heinrich's webpage, where he pretty much developed the whole Penn State shaker box, what you can see there, that he's actually telling you how much strength you need to add to those boxes to get a consistent result. It's just like you're working on a motorcycle or in a car. There are certain parts of the engine that they require a specific torque, and actually you can buy a torque wrench where you type that in, and that's how much power or force or torque you're going to add to that screw, for example. The same thing here. We don't have how much torque I should give here, but he talks about a certain amount of time, like 17 centimeters. That's how much you should go back and forth every time you're doing that. So a lot of very interesting things that actually we can capture, because on that weekend, so on the 14th here, we have that third sieve at 25%. When you go the next week is at 15%, right? And then when you go back, you're going to see that it's 13% here, and then it goes back to around 17 here, right? So it depends. I know that one student did here, another student did here. Big point is that seems to matter a lot for that third sieve and the bottom, not so much for the top 2. So if you're really just targeting those top 2, I wouldn't be too worried about how much strength and measuring the strength, but you want to apply a good amount of strength to make sure all that material travels through the sieves, right? And here you can see, especially on the third sieve, you're having that difference. Now, the other thing that I would say is that depending on how wet is your diet, you may want to correct for dry matter. So you can get the material out of each one of those sieves, do the dry matter on those, and then do a corrected on a dry matter basis on the percentages that you have. Especially if you have a lot of, in our case here, wet distiller's grain, that can cause some clumps, and then you don't have the things traveling very well, right? So you may control for that. So that's one thing to bring up on his Penn State box. The other thing is that we like to do as well on the orts and try to capture any big difference. So you can see here that we don't see a lot of difference. We could be sending that for analysis as well, the orts, if there's big differences in the fiber components to capture some sorting. So it seems like we're happy there. And here you have the same story with the lactating diet. You can have here on the top, on the offered, right? And then you would have here the refusals that we are measuring. And that's what you'd have. So they're very similar. So you see that probably cows are not sorting. And now all these things, this control should be able to give us a good idea on the intakes of those cows. So this is some examples here. You have all the numbers here. This is in pounds, how many pounds of dry matter intake they're getting every day, starting on day minus 31, for example. So you see, we start measuring, this doesn't count, but then the cows eat. You see, usually with control energy diets, you don't see a huge drop. That can happen sometimes. After they calve, right, then you can see that intake is going up, right? Now, something that you're going to see, so these cows are calving and they are around 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds of intake. Before calving, they are around 25, something like that, or even more, right? So if I consider the whole, I'm just going to take that day out there, right? For example, if I want to do, what was the average intake that this cow had before calving? And her average intake was 33 pounds of dry matter intake, right? And now I have to go back to what we formulated the diet for, and we need to see, okay, this cow is eating enough, or also maybe she may be eating too much, and we may have to adjust that a little bit, right? So this is all the prepartum. We have another, we make some notes there. You can have another other cow here, same story. If I do this here, I'm going to take out that 0.45 before calving. Probably she was a little bit stressed out, right? Happens. So this cow had around 32, so 32, 33 pounds of dry matter intake. That's what these cows at that facility are getting, right? And remember, each farm may be a little bit different. But again, you have this idea here that they are eating, then it drops on calving, and then they start eating right away. That's something that you could expect. So some of those controls, the Penn State box, the dry matter that we adjust that in the wagon every week, that needs to be important so we can get those cows eating. So now that we saw some of the components for control energy, let's talk about minerals and vitamins. And here I'm proposing suggesting that we use a negative decad strategy before calving, but more or less is talking about, start again. So you guys just saw what we talk about when you're talking about energy for the cows before calving. Now moving to the minerals and vitamins, those would be the recommendations. And one thing is important, especially if adding a negative decad diet before calving, is to make sure whatever you are trying to achieve, you're achieving, right? And we do know a lot of information about urine pH and negative decad, and how does that relate with calcium circulating in the diet. So I think measuring urine pH, it's a very important tool to make sure that what is being achieved is wanting to be achieved is being achieved, actually. And also it's an interesting tool for management purposes, and we're going to talk about it in a few.
So this is the urine strips. And then you just collect that, and then you have a spreadsheet where you place all the urine pH. Okay, let's do it. So that's going to be between 6 and 6.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here you guys can see some of the pictures of another moment where collection was made, but at this point we are comparing actually the strips to the pH meter, right? And trying to answer that question, can we use the strips instead of having a pH meter? That could be a little bit more expensive, a little bit more troublesome. And yes, so there's a lot of correlation between whatever you're getting with the pH meter versus each one of the brands that we use. So I would say that both strips should be good to go and should be able to use. So I think it's important in implementing the strategy, making sure that that strategy is happening. There's not many other strategies that you have a tool that you can really measure and say if it's working or not. So why not take advantage of this, right? And interesting enough, right, as we would go through the trial, we are doing that urine pH every week, right? So you can see here that whenever cows, they come in this trial specifically, whenever cows are coming into the trial, here you see that their urine pH, they're going to be high, right? Because they just got there 2-3 days. They were not eating enough of that negative decad diet yet. However, when they are on that diet for 2-3 days at least, you're going to have another group of cows in your pen that they're going to be with a lower urine pH, right? So you should see this distinction where you have cows that just came into the pen, they didn't have the full effect yet, and you have cows that already had the full effect of the diet of that negative decad, and their urine pH is lower. However, as you can see, the moment somebody forgets to add the negative decad product to the diet, we don't see that separation anymore. And here comes that, what I was talking about, urine pH being also a management tool to tell you, yes, that diet is being well mixed and the products are there. Whenever I don't see that happening anymore, either somebody forgot to add, like in our case that I just mentioned, but you capture that pretty quick, or perhaps you have some changes in forage that now it needs to have some adjustment in that concentrate on that amount of decad or something to be able to bring to what you were expecting, okay? And recently, there's a paper coming out on talking about that negative decad, but also how much calcium should be using in that environment of negative decad. So I'm gonna share some of the results with you, right? So there were 3 treatments, a control, where cows had a positive decad before calving and 46 grams of calcium. There was a negative decad, right? Again, there was 44 grams of calcium, pretty similar to the control, but now I'm going to minus 24, right? And that minus 24 is what's required to bring that urine pH between 5.5 and 6, right? So that's kind of the control. That's what I'm proposing to you guys. If we talk about negative decad, we need to talk about urine pH just to make sure we talk about the same thing. If I have a minus 20, but I am at 7 urine pH, that's going to be a different conversation, right? So I'm talking about in this environment here. And we keep the same negative decad for the last treatment, but then we add calcium. And we go to, at this here, we went to 226, right? So it's a big jump. 46 to 226, and we say which one is the better. Again, I'm not telling you that 226 is the best. I'm going to be telling you if it's better than 46, right? We can discuss all day long if 150, 180, 145 would be better. We still need to do that research within this environment of 5.5 to 6 urine pH. These are some of the results, and here what you're seeing is pretty much the dry cow diets. So you're going to see that for real was pretty much 0.4, 0.4, and 2% on a dry matter of that calcium, okay? Again, we know that cows that consume negative DCAD, they're going to be excreting more calcium. So that comes, do we need to include more through the diet to make sure the pool is still okay, right? And here you go, the DCAD, the same thing I just told you. And yeah, the urine pH, especially when you are going to that 5.5 to 6, the management strategy to control that, it's very efficient, more efficient than you're trying to keep at 6.6, for example, right? It's just a matter of how pH works in a solution, right? So if we don't give the DCAD product, yeah, you don't get DCAD and you stay in your 8s. For example, after calving, our cows got the same diet. So here you can see, yes, we were able to make sure that the urine pH was where it was designed to be. And here is just an overall number, so the same thing here. And one of the things is that whenever we had the negative DCAD versus the control, it seems that we had more calcium circulating in that cow, especially in that very moment of calving. So 1 hour after calving here, either total or ionized calcium, both of them, right? The amount of calcium that we fed before calving didn't make a difference here in the amount of calcium circulating in the cow. And going to the intake, one thing that was very interesting is that there was this difference between control and negative DCAD. So whenever you have negative DCAD, those cows, they ate a little bit less. So there was a 1 or half kilo, if you do the average, right, the difference here. And actually there was a tendency. What's very interesting, and I think we should follow up on this, is trying to explain why, right? So you see when I added calcium, I had more intake than when I didn't have the calcium, right? So again, that can bring, what is that calcium? And in our case, calcium carbonate, limestone, what is that bringing to the rumen environment? And what could that be changing, especially in rumen fermentation, rumen pH, ideas of a better buffering perhaps with that mineral there, and less risk for acidosis before calving. There's some very cool information coming from Canada talking about, hey, our cows may be experiencing some acidosis before calving. We can talk more about that later in the debate, but that is some of the things that I think would be very interesting. And again, when adding that negative DCAD, you should expect that what you're formulating for and what you're getting, you should always be comparing that. So if you formulate a diet for 13 kilos of intake and your cows are eating 11 or 10, you better adjust that to make sure, right? So it's a big thing is whatever you're formulating for, make sure that that's happening. If not, you need to adjust your diet, right? One point there. So that's kind of one interesting thing here. Again, on this part here, on the dry matter intake, there's a little difference here in body weight, control versus not, negative DCAD. I'm not sure how much biologically that means, but no difference in intake or milk for either of these strategies. When we play that throughout the period we were controlling for 5 weeks, and then you see this interaction of treatment and time. So that means that the treatments behave different throughout the first 5 weeks of lactation. And you can see here that control really has more of a flat response instead of the ones having negative DCAD. That could indicate some more like a normal curve for fat-corrected milk. I mean, again, milk yield was not different, but there was this interaction. They behaved different. And one thing that caught attention, again, there was not enough cows on the trial to really pinpoint on inferences about diseases, but you can see that whenever we aggregate there into the scores, it seems like that cows receiving that calcium before calving and negative DCAD, they were much healthier than the cows that did not, right? It's still to expand more on this idea and expand more, where's that calcium coming from, the source and bioavailability, and how does that can affect the intake that we talked before, but also this section here. One thing that we did was follow those cows into some reproductive measurements, right? Like days to first ovulation. We know that cows that ovulate sooner, they have more chances of getting pregnant. So here you can see that really giving that negative DCAD anticipated that ovulation, and also a weak tendency for the cows with the calcium ovulating earlier. And again, we didn't have enough cows to say so, but there is some tendency that when you compare control versus the negative DCAD with calcium, that the negative DCAD calcium cows, they were able to get more pregnant, or they had more chances of getting pregnant after the treatment. But again, this is an indication that there's some more to explore here. And we did a lot of the uterine biopsies. We went through the molecular biology. There's a whole paper on this from Ryan, and then more than happy to talk more about it and share with you, right? But how about talking about another item, and maybe our third strategy here is talking about crude protein, right? We talking about crude protein can make one big mistake, and this was work done by in our department here, Ignacio and Dr. Clark, Jimmy Clark. Actually, Jimmy Clark was one of the editors for the NRC in 2001. Now we are in the hopes of getting one this year. Very excited about it. But what they showed is that, hey, two big things here. So they just plotted what was the crude protein of that diet and what is the milk yield. And you can see at 18% crude protein, where we think that curve is plateauing, this is how much milk we are getting, right? So you can see that you have cows producing 20-something kilos per day, but also close to 45. And at the same point, cows that were producing 30 kilos of milk per day, they were either eating 12% crude protein, or they could be eating something like 24, 23, right? So you can have the same crude protein in diet and a huge amount of milk. You can have the same milk and be having a lot of crude protein percentage in the diet. So what this graph tells us is that crude protein does not relate very well with production and does not tell us the whole story. We need to go a little bit deeper, right? And you guys already know all that. I don't know what is the RDP, RUP of those diets, and I don't know something else, the metabolizable protein and the amino acids that we know since 2001 that methionine and lysine are the limiting amino acids for lactating cows. And we've seen that's the same story with dry cows as well, going to the lactation, right? So I think those are two very important points to talk and measure on your diets, is what is your metabolizable protein, and are you making sure you have those limiting amino acids? Those are big points that you need to track on your diet before and after calving as well. So I think it's important for us to go there and see how is that done. So check this video. Hi guys, so how about if we take a look now on that diet that was mixed? So we're gonna take a look on how it started on paper or pretty much on computer on AMTS. And then we're gonna look into the wet chemistry of that TMR analyze. So let's see if I can pull this up. Yeah, let's share. So that's my AMTS here. So it's pretty simple. We have a corn silage, that is BMR. We have water, right, for this dry cow. We have corn gluten feed. We have wheat straw. So we're feeding pretty much 11 pounds of that. Tricky part, you can always click here, and then you have in metric. Computer, here we go. So if you guys want to take a look on the kilos, that's what we have right there. Let me go back to ingredients in pounds. So very simple diet. If you want to take a look, oops, this is what we have in the mix, right? So we have canola meal there. We have amino acids, the methionine and lysine, some bypass soy. We have our calcium source to bring that 1.5% calcium that I'm using here, because I'm going to minus 121 DCAD. You can see it here, DCAD 1 minus, oops, there. We're gonna take a look at there. A little bit of urea to bring down our DP, the DCAD product, soybean hulls. That's something good for us to make sure It gives a little bit of soluble fiber, but also it flows in the bean pretty nice when we have that. Microminerals, all the minerals right there, right? So this would be the mix that we're giving on that you saw Lisa feeding there. Okay, so one important thing is that we are feeding 28 pounds, 0.6. It predicts that they're going to eat 28.41. Like I said, those two cows, right? They are eating around 32 pounds. So you're pretty good, and actually you need to check if they're not even eating a little bit too much. So we need to follow that more to see what the cows are eating. But for sure, you don't want cows eating less than 28 pounds. That would be your kind of goal for this diet, right? Then you could see here some things already. For example, the starch around 15% of the dry matter. We are a little bit over, just make sure everybody's getting the energy. So I could probably put that down to 100, 102, right? But we would like to set, that's the way I approach at least. I'm setting on that energy. And then from that energy, when I'm talking about amino acids, then I could click here on amino acids. I'm going on methionine at 1.17 grams per megacal. So grams per megacal, that's what I have for methionine. And then I'm matching that with lysine. So I'm just playing with the amounts of that lysine to bring up to that 315. This would be the actual grams of methionine and lysine that the cow is getting, not just from the commercial source, but from everything in the diet. And here would be the percentage of MP. So I'm at 2.789 on the methionine, and then lysine I'm at 7.51, right? So if I look into my MP here, then I'll be around 1150 or getting close to that 1200 grams that I could see here, right? So coming back to this ration output, here you see the lysine, methionine, the percent of requirement. I personally don't look too much into it. Our crude protein, again, we should not be looking at, but it's at 15, right? And you can see all the other, we are at 0.64, so it could be around 0.664. And our ratio, for somebody that wants to know, lysine and methionine is in 269. The other thing that I do sometimes is that if I can't find something here, I can, of course you can manage this to show everything you need, but sometimes I have to give that to the feeder or talk to students. I just do a report. You can have all your reports there, but then I go and find here, for example, some of the things that, for example, we are talking about here, an ANDF of 48 and an ADF of 31 and 48. Then you can have some other ratios here. If you want to look into it, I usually don't go either extract more than 5%, so you're all good there. Sugar at 331. I think that's something that we could explore more in the future. What would be if I could have that at 6% and reduce even more the amount of starch? That should be something, actually, that is something we are looking to look into it, right? So we're going to be looking into that. I think it's very important. Again, my DCAD, the main formula, minus 121. That's why we put a little bit of calcium, 1.4. And this is pretty much what we're doing. So we're not using the full optimization here. Again, this is a research diet, so we are not looking into really generate profits, but pretty much make sure we get everything we need so the treatments can show the differences, right? But you could hit the optimization. You have the optimizer there, advanced optimizer that you could do and really dial down to a very least cost information. So now let's look into that same thing. So this is the diet formulator for that TMR that we are mixing there. Now let's look into it if I can here. Yeah, so this is a PDF, dairy one, and we send that TMR, right? So you can see, so you can see, for example, that our crude protein, we were expecting 5.1, we have 15.1, 15.9, so it's pretty good there. ADF 27, AMDF 42. We were formulating for 31 and 48, remember? So maybe a little bit, some of the fibers here are a little bit better quality than what we expected. Again, we are working with averages, right? But I think it's very important to formulate the diet the best you can, make sure the cows are eating, okay? And then after you're mixing it, that you take a sample and send for analysis. I'm not sure you need a wet chemistry. Basically, I think NIR would be okay for a commercial farm, right? But this is research project, so we really need to have all the wet chemistry done in it. Lignin is okay. Our starch, we were talking about 15, 16. We are right there. We are below 5 on my crude fat. And maybe you're coming here with a little bit more energy than we talk about it. We thought about 1.4 calcium. You're coming here at 125. And again, don't be frustrated. You're never going to get the exact numbers, but you need to be very close, right? And this is one day that day. We collect samples every week, and then we kind of composite that to have kind of on average what the cows got, right? We're not even talking about the whole wagon management and each ingredient, what is the deviation from the correct weight. I'm assuming all that is going on okay. And I'm checking here. If this is not okay, then I have to go back and my mixing has something. So I'd rather go to this product here needs to be okay. That's what the cow is getting. That's her recipe right here. So at least the broad sense, right? I don't have amino acids here. I don't have a lot of things that I'm believing on that software to be delivering. But in a nutshell, that's kind of how it is. So we formulate, we use AMTS here, we find our ratios, we put our amino acids so cows can perform the best as they can. We mix that, we check if everything is being fed okay, and then we collect samples and send for analysis to make sure they're getting what you think, right? Let's go next. What's next? So talking about amino acids, one thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is this thing developed by the Italian group, Dr. Tervisi and Bertoni, a while ago, and I think we're just getting more and more refinement on that process, is this liver functionality index, right? So it's, can we find a way to tell if that cow is healthier than another cow? Can we tell if her liver is working better than another cow's liver, right? So through some blood drawing, so if I collect blood samples in a certain period of time, in certain days after calving and before calving, I can tell you that story. And actually what happened in this paper here, they were able to compare cows that were receiving ruminant-protected methionine or not. So coming back again, this low LFI, liver functionality index, right? They divided in low LFI or high LFI. So if I have a higher, that means that it's more functional. If I have a low number, that means that it's not as functional, right? And here it is just a suggestion of some of those metabolites that they are measuring and putting that equation, like albumin, cholesterol, bilirubin, take at different time points, right? And what they saw in this paper was that, hey, there was a tendency for the cows that had rumen-protected methionine in the diet, they have more, they were more classified as HLFI. So they have a better, smoother transition, right, from the liver perspective. Some of the things as well that they saw is that close-up dry matter intake. Look at this, the dry matter, look at this graph here. The dry matter intake that I have with a high LFI, cows eat more, right? After calving, the same story. And how about milk yield? Look how those cows perform much better. So it seems like, imagine if we could have that as a little test. The cow calf, I take a blood sample, I know what's going on with her, right? And I can make early on decisions on it. That still doesn't happen, but it seems like in a research environment, I can figure that out right here. The other thing they found was that, hey, seems like again, that cows that had methionine on the diet, the concentration of methionine for those high LFI, there was increased. So they had more methionine circulating, probably because they were the ones that were being supplemented, they were having that. And also now trimethylhistidine, there is a marker for muscle breakdown, was lower for the cows in the high LFI. So they probably didn't have to have as much muscle mobilization for energy or other sources as the other cows had. So very interesting thing. And also goes to the immune system aspect of it. So either if I'm talking about acute phase protein like haptoglobin, the cows with the age LFI, it was lower, and the immune biomarkers related to being able to mount a response, then you could see that the age LFI, those cows were higher than the cows that were in low LFI. So again, a connection between feeding the right amino acids to the cows and then being more able to work in the liver that corresponds to biomarkers related to protein metabolism, like the trimethylhistidine, immunology, and then going back to, hey, intake and milk. That's what most of farmers are looking for, right? How about the uterine content or the uterine environment? We already know from previous research that cows that had rumen-protected methionine provided to them, when we measured the amount of inflammatory cells, here I'm calling PMNs, polymorphonuclear, they have higher PMNs at the beginning at 15 days in milk. However, right here, however, when that happens to the moment of breeding that cow, now that is inverted. So it seems like the cows, they can mount a better immune response early on in lactation, clear that uterus, and now at the moment of breeding, that uterine environment is improved compared to cows not receiving the essential amino acid methionine that we know it's limiting in dairy cows, right? And again, very nice paper by Dr. LeBlanc from Guelph, putting that in theory, that's what should be happening, right? Your healthy cows are the ones that can mount a good response before early on, get rid of any infection and inflammation, and then they are the healthy cows. The problem are the ones that keep responding and inflamed, or the ones that cannot even mount a response because they don't have the nutrients for it. For example, that could be one explanation. So in order for us to expect cows to respond to problems after calving, to respond to metritis, endometritis, uterine inflammation, that is huge impact in dairy cattle, that is going to impact cows getting pregnant or not. We need to make sure cows are getting through that TMR the right components. Again, that concept of prescription, we need to give what is needed so we can capture on a healthier cow. Remember, if we don't have healthy cows, it doesn't matter much other things, right? We need to have healthy cows so they can answer to some of the other additives that we are talking about. That's why I don't classify amino acids as additives, because that's required. We know that from 2001. It's 20 years already. And now we are having the ability to do that in a protected form very efficiently, what may not be the case with some other additives, right? But the cow needs to be healthy to be able to respond to anything we do to her in a from management perspective or nutritional perspective as well. And now we knew a lot about methionine, and here I'm going to share one of our recent papers about lysine, right? Is lysine, we know it's a limiting, but it seems like not to be as directed. So we wanted to ask directly related to some of those things we just talked about it. So we wanted to do some more research on it. So a lot of details there that I'm just going to give a snapshot here, right? So we wanted to know before and after calving, that change kind of in this type of design where before calving, we either give or not rumen-protected lysine. Methionine is constant. And then after the calving, we flip a coin. That cow goes either continues to receive rumen-protected lysine or now she stops receiving it, right? And that's why we have those sequences where cows get the whole time lysine, just before calving, just after calving, or they never got lysine. So we have those 4 groups of cows, and roughly we fed 80 and up with 76 cows total, right? Here, the diet, I'm not going to get much into it, but it's going to be similar to whatever we are talking about here through the videos and through the strategies we're formulating. Very similar, right? To highlight is, of course, we are going through a lower prepartum crude protein. We try to keep that starch to a manageable level. We are in that 140 NEL before calving, and it's here, but again, crude protein, we don't care. What we really care is that, well, we are trying to get to that MP before calving to that 1,200 grams, like I'm talking about. Here, it's just multiparous cows, right? So that's one thing. And then here are the ratios that you can talk about. It gets all weird, of course. We took out the lysine out there, so you have your different ratio. And here are your grams predicted that those cows are getting. So this is where I think more and more you're going to be discussing when you're talking about the protein component of a diet, rather than talking about crude protein, for example. What we saw this change in body weight. It seems like the cows that received lysine, they were able to keep more of that body weight, and showed here after calving through this interaction of body condition score, where it seems like cows in lysine, they were able to use better that adipose tissue that they had. We are still doing some research here and trying to understand more on how so. Why would lysine increase or improve how cows can use their adipose tissue, right? Or reduce adipose tissue mobilization. We don't have all the answers now, but we are looking into that already. We had liver biopsies and things, so we can take a look into that. One thing that was very interesting was this tendency here for if the cows had lysine before calving, they tended to eat more after calving. So that was something interesting, right? And we didn't find any differences in milk yield after calving, right? 0.15 p-value. So we didn't find a difference after calving. However, if we look into energy-corrected milk or fat-corrected milk, the cows that received lysine before calving, that was impacted. So there was a carryover where whatever you fed before calving impacted what happened after calving. In this case, fat-corrected milk and also all the components, right? So we actually were able to measure as well casein. So that means those cows, they're going to provide you more cheese than if they did not receive rumen-protected lysine before calving. So very interesting thing on what we think. We didn't do mammary gland biopsies, but we think there's something about priming the alveoli before calving, especially in that colostrum formulation and everything else. But we don't have all the answers there. It's just a hypothesis, right? And we talk about that in the paper if you want to read more about it. One thing that we did was that we followed those cows. So the red line here is when we stopped giving rumen-protected lysine, right? And interesting enough, as soon as we stop, it seems like that just goes down and gets to the same level as control cows, right? So it would be interesting if we didn't stop at 4 weeks, what would happen with milk yield if we kept feeding? Would we be seeing a difference? We still don't know, but I think that's an area to go where, hey, let's go a little bit more. Perhaps we go to 70 days or we go until 10 weeks to trying to figure out if really that's important for us to keep feeding that lysine specific here, right? So just something interesting that we can talk about it. And talking about this extra things, one thing that we followed up was all the cows that calved, we measured the colostrum. Okay, so we were interested in this whole perspective of prepping the cow to better feed the calf. And Dr. Van Emberg from Cornell has a lot of information on that. What is colostrum? Are we just talking about IgG or the immunoglobulins? There's a lot of other things in the colostrum that are important for that early development of the calf. So he has some webinars here in this series. Go ahead and check it because they are very educational, very interesting, right? But we did do that measurement where you collect the volume for those cows receiving lysine or not. We didn't see any difference, right, on that. the fat, the true protein, total solids, we send that for analysis, and the IgG on it. Actually, there is a way that we can suggest you guys fairly easy to figure out what is the quality of colostrum of your cows, right? Especially when seasons are changing, you may have some challenges with colostrum. So I have a video here for you guys on the bricks, right? And how we use it to generate some of this information that we think it's very important. Take a look.
So today I'm going to be doing brinks on our fresh colostrum samples. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on our machine. And then I'm going to go to menu. And then as you can see, it says brinks, go to set. So we're going to press go. And now it's ready. So with a pipette, I like to just put a little droplet right in the center. And then we're going to press go. And it's going to start reading. And our brinks is going to be 28.8. And then we go ahead and write this down in our forms, and that is all we do.
Another aspect from this lysine research was that whenever the calves were on the ground, we would pull them from the dam, so they would not have colostrum from the dam. We would give a commercial colostrum, and then we would feed them equally. So the only difference from all those calves, female or males coming from those cows, were that they came from different uterine environments. Everything else was the same. Colostrum was a colostrum replacer. Everything was the same, right? And actually, the calves that came from cows that had lysine, they had a tendency to eat more after calving. Okay, so this is what was the intake of dry matter, of crude protein, and metabolizable energy. So very interesting, and that end up with those calves being less sick, right? And they have a better immunological response when we challenge those cells that we collected from them. So we collect a blood sample, challenge those cells, and see which one would respond better. So very interesting thing where we can connect what we are feeding the cow, right? They didn't have the colostrum from the cow. They had a commercial colostrum. And we can see that in early development, the first 6 weeks, they behave different, right? And them receiving that amino acid, lysine, improved what happened with the calf after calving, right? So that's my brief topic, talk about calves here. We know there's a lot of information about changing amino acids from the milk replacer, everything else. There's nothing of that here. Same milk replacer for everybody. And something was happening in utero that made those calves be different, right? And that's something that we are searching and looking into it to try to explain what have happened. Why lysine would communicate something to the calf, or is just to the cow that reflects into the calf. What's going on there that could justify these calves from cows having lysine, consuming more milk replacer, more energy, more nutrients, and therefore being healthier, right? So coming to our take-home message here, I think, again, it's important in a more broad view of the things on the farm, make sure you identify what are the processes that have huge standard deviation, right? And try to minimize those and reduce those as much as you can. So you may have to do dry matters in a farm once a week, in another farm that you know the variation is larger because they don't have a good chopper, or because they spread out the period that they harvest corn silage or haylage. So you need to do maybe twice a week or 3 times a week. And I think that's how you're gonna promote that farmer to be successful, right? It's not just to reach for that average, but it's also to reduce the variation around that average or around that mean, right? So you don't want just the average of that pen to do this much milk. You want almost all the cows to be there at that mean, right? So focus on that, and those are the processes that you need to check, just like what we did here. If I want to have cows eating well, performing well in my research project, I need to check some things every week. And most likely the ones that have more variation. That's what we do. Okay, so putting all together, that's what is our goal. We want to minimize health disorders, maximize production, and also have good reproduction, right? We want to do that through our diet. At least that's my perspective. I'm not saying that anything else is not important, but of course, comfort, ventilation, a lot of other things, but I don't talk about that. My research is focused on the nutrition aspects of it. So let's face that as a prescription. We need to have some things there to have our desired outcome of no disease, max production, and good reproduction. And those three strategies, I think, when they work together, they are extremely efficient and potent and can give you some of those results. However, we need to talk the same language, and we need to talk about fiber characterization, sorting. We need to figure that out. We need to understand urine pH if we are using that strategy of DCAD, and we can be feeding amino acids, but if we don't have enough MP, or that means enough of the other amino acids, we are also not going to be efficient. So it's not just adding amino acids and I'm good. No, we need to understand also all the amino acids that we are feeding, if they are enough, because they may be short as well. So we need to come from that MEP perspective. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Here is my email. Feel free to contact me. We have a Facebook, Instagram page as well. Feel free to connect with us. We are oftentimes promoting the papercast or some of the newsletter. And now I think is the time where we're going to come and chat a little bit and discuss some of your questions. And I'm really looking forward to it. See you in a bit.
Before we get started with your questions, I will introduce next month's webinar and special webinar series that we're holding, my co-hosts, and also thank this year's sponsors. Our next webinar will provide a considerable climate change from the last two webinars held in cold, snowy North America. We'll be traveling south, where Marcelo Hens Ramos, our AMTS distributor in Brazil, will give us a tour and insight on Brazilian dairies. Marcelo obtained his veterinary degree from the Federal University of Lavras and came to the U.S. for his master's at the University of Wisconsin and his PhD at the University of Missouri. Marcelo is the director of 3R Lab in Brazil, as well as our hard-working distributor. So join us to soak up some virtual sun, but I cannot promise any Brazilian beaches. Additional feature webinars this spring will focus on sheep nutrition. Our first speaker is Masudo Noon, one of the founders and present director of ADINA. He will join us Thursday, March 18th at 8 a.m. His talk will focus on lamb fattening in Europe. He will cover breeds, production systems, feeds, and formulation for those of you formulating for small ruminants. A second webinar, April 15th, with Philippe Hassoun from INRA in France, will focus on milking sheep. We will wrap up our sheep feeding sequence on May 20th with a discussion from John Winchell from Alltech. John has been a longtime AMTS Pro user and has been working most recently with our small ruminant model. John will be taking some of the information we learned from the first two webinars and demonstrating how he applies them in the program. We're very pleased to have John join us as co-host for the first two webinars as well. Email me at webinars@agmodelsystems to sign up for any of these webinars. As you know, these webinars take a lot of work and cooperation. The webinars are organized and produced by AMTS USA and Global. Our co-hosts in the morning webinar were Elena Bonfante, AMTS Italian distributor, and partner in Dairy Innovations with Bill Prokop. We also welcomed our distributor from Turkey, Dr. Huday Kavusturen, joining us for the first time. In the evening, we were joined by our longtime collaborator, Paula Turillo of Afina, who hosts the series as a webinar del Nutritionista. She receives support from Rock River Lab in Argentina and is ably assisted by Paula Alanes in translating. We also thank AMTS distributors joining us from China, Sean Lee of Ansai Tech, Brazil, Marcelo Hens Ramos, director of 3R Lab, and in Russia, Vadim Bekchebnikov of Nova Lab. We are especially thankful to our generous sponsors who make it possible for us to get great speakers and manage the program. We thank our gold sponsors, Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production, #ScienceHearted, the Canola Council of Canada. Learn more about feeding canola at canolamazing.com. Adina, experts in animal nutrition with expertise in plant bioactives, and Proteca, transforming the future of farm animal health. Our silver sponsors are Ajinomoto, Superior Nutrition through Amino Acids, and Virtus, both of whom have sponsored us from the start. Also, the Forage Analysis Laboratories of Dairyland Laboratories and Dairy One, both with affiliates around the world. Adaseo, Ruminant Nutrition Solutions to ensure animal performance and micronutrients, feeding the future. Our bronze sponsors are Amino Max, Purdue Agribusiness, Origination Inc., Phileo, Balchem, and the Milk Group. Each of these companies support education and research worldwide. We hope that you consider them in your formulation decisions. We will now play the questions from each recorded session. I will just simply splice them together. It is a long webinar at the end, so you may want to break this up into a couple sessions. I'm going to switch to a view where if Phil wants me to go to a certain page, we can. And I also want to see our attendees so that I can keep track of who's asking questions. So now that I'm all organized, hi everybody, Elena, Hudai, and Phil, unmute your mics if you would and greet our people.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
You know what? I have to turn up my volume. Sorry, Elena, I can't hear a word you're saying, but I can tell you're talking.
I just say hi, Marianne.
Hi, good. I had two computers going and I was getting an echo anyway. And I apologize for people watching that the video is a little jerky. I wasn't aware of that because it all looks good when I'm transmitting it. So I'm going to do a little playing this afternoon to see if I can make it so that it's better as we go through this. Again, I'll stop talking. Elena, Hudai, Phil, how are you this morning?
Okay,
or afternoon, as may be the case?
Very good. Thank you.
Good. Phil, we have some questions in my window, but Elena and Hudai has asked me to ask the questions for him. Elena, would you like to start off with a few questions or comments from your aspect? I know that it might be getting a little bit long in the day for you, so I'm going to give you a first go.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. So thank you for the great presentation as well. I think the transition is, the focus also to get the best results out of our cows. And all the strategies you talk about are actually probably known somehow, but difficult to apply sometimes. And it was great. It was great to have some clarifications about the researches that have been done so far. And I have also a question based upon your results on DCAD and negative DCAD actually. So you mentioned, or the trial you have done with the low DCAD -25 that has cause actually a low or less dry matter intake in the cows. Could it be possible, in your opinion, or have you done some research that prove the benefit of a negative DCAD without going so low?
Hi, Elena, and hopefully everybody can hear me well.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in this, I think there are different ways that we can approach that question. We can go to something that here in the US, at least, we have been talking about partially acidifying or fully acidifying, and that would relate to the degree of that negative DCAD. And I think the degree then to be measured by the urine pH, right?
So in this case, what we wanted to explore is that under fully acidified, so that means that I'm going to be targeting a urine pH of 5.5, right? Let's talk about 5.5 to 6. And we can talk about why would you go there, right? And the need for additional calcium into that diet, right? So there's this expectation that, okay, I'm doing a negative DCAD, and I know that I'm going to be having more calcium excretion, especially through the urine. So would it be beneficial to add that calcium? And I think that was the research that we did, and those are the results that I showed. So under fully acidified diet, where your target pH of 5.5, you're going to get benefits from adding the calcium. Now, does that mean that I'm telling everybody to use a diet with 5.5? That were the, how can I say, that were the objectives of that research, right? So I think there's some information that we could go to a urine pH of 6 and we could have success as well. But again, I think we need to just open our eyes to one thing. If we think about our chemistry class in high school, for me, it's a long time ago, but one of the things is, oh, here you go, here I am. One of the things that we have to think about when we lower the pH in a solution is that as you induce more acid to that solution, that means that pH starts getting lower. The variation around that number is lower as well. So you keep adding, and then at some point that solution drops in pH and then it stays there. So a pH of 5.5, usually farmers, they're going to have more consistency among their cows. So when you start measuring the urine pH in all your pen, and the cows in the pen, usually they're going to be pretty well controlled. When you're targeting 6 or 6.5, and that's chemistry, it's not me talking, right? You're going to have a bigger variation. So if diet, forages, other things add to that variation, you may have a bigger challenge in controlling that urine pH or that acidification to your cows. So you can expect that extra calcium after calving. So I think that under any negative DCAD, especially going to 5.5, adding calcium is important. However, staying at 6, that should be also something very well done. However, I would just highlight on what is the variation that you're getting in the urine pH of the cows, and that may be a challenge on that. So I think every time that was one of my kind of suggestions here, that don't get too caught up. Even in AMTS, right, we're going to see your DCAD 1, your DCAD 2, and it's going to say, okay, this is -20, this is -18, negative DCAD. However, it's very different when you go and you measure the urine pH. That's really what the cow is eating and what's happening in the cow. So when we talk about negative DCAD, I think we need to talk about, okay, what's the urine pH that you're doing? Because I can have a diet -20 and my cows be at 6 urine pH, and I can have the same diet -20 and my cows be at 5.5 urine pH, depending on which source I'm using for acidifying the diet and other variations into the forages. And hopefully I didn't extend too much here.
No, it was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Elena, if you don't mind, I have a couple questions while we're on that topic of DCAD and the dry cow diet in the chat window. With regards to adding molasses to that could increase the potassium. Is that okay? And do you need to add, if you're adding a kilogram of molasses, would you need to add more anionic salts?
I think that's a good question. I think the inclusion of sugar, especially prepartum, is something that we should look more into it. I think there is that research that I shared from Trevor from University of Guelph, from Dr. DeVries, that I think highlights a little bit of how much maybe you're missing on that microbial protein by not adding enough sugar, especially before calving. I know that molasses most of the time is not a good buy or something that we'll be looking to it. However, there are other alternatives for that sugar. But coming back, I would actually add that to your diet formulation, and I would see how much you have to add extra of that anionic salt to see how much more you'd have to do it to get to the same negative DCAD. So bottom line, I wouldn't be afraid of using molasses if I need to use more of that product. I would just be cautious of looking at intakes of cows, and ideally, all the products that you're using that, right? I think we are not talking about ammonium sulfate. I think we're not talking about that. We are talking about the blends that can originate that. It's going to be very farm dependent. You know, what is the potassium of your forages pretty much, right? I know that some places in the world, it's hard to get that control energy diet out of straw, wheat straw like we have here, availability. So you end up using like a poor quality grass hay or haylage, and that usually comes with more potassium than what I have in my straw. So I wouldn't be afraid of increasing or using that molasses, but I would make sure that you're adding enough of that product or that negative DCAD source to still be in that same negative. I think the benefits that you're getting from the sugar are going to be far beyond than adding a little bit more of that product, hopefully. And always going to come back to urine pH, right?
Mm-hmm. Elena, I have one more DCAD related question so far. If you don't mind, I'll continue to butt in unless you have DCAD related question.
Go ahead, Marianne, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. So the question that I have is, let's see, where is it? This is from Hudai. What about feeding first calf heifers with a DCAD negative diet? Does that work?
That's a very good question. And then unfortunately, our research literature is not as vast on first calf heifers or first lactation animals. From the perspective that we have, right, that we are mainly using that strategy to improve calcium absorption and prevent milk fever and other associated disorders, right? I think nowadays it's pretty rare to find farms that experience milk fever or clinical hypocalcemia, cows going down. It's very rare. I think we are more nowadays talking about the subclinical hypocalcemia and how is that impacting reproduction and everything else, and production too. So I think that I just forgot, what was the question again?
Oh, it was with regards to DCADs in first calf heifer diets.
Oh, yeah. So I think, of course. So the challenge is, not the challenge, but those animals, they don't have as much challenge on hypocalcemia or milk fever as we have with mature cows, right? So mature cows, there's some research talking about 50% of the animals, at least they experience some hypocalcemia. What's a pretty big number. However, in the first lactation animals, that number, I don't know the number in the top of my head, but we know that they don't experience as much milk fever. So it's still kind of debatable, I would say, on the benefits there. I would say for sure mature cows, heifers first lactation, I wouldn't. I've seen a lot of farms that they don't do it in their heifers.
Yeah, I wonder if that would have breed dependent variation as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think especially Jersey cows, we know sometimes they are a little bit more susceptible to hypocalcemia, right? There's something there that I don't think we understand very well, how they metabolize lipids and how does that impact calcium absorption.
yeah, I don't know.
Right. Elena, I'll turn back to you if you have more questions or comments.
Thank you, Marianne. So far from the Italian side, I don't think there are any more. So I will let you finish with yours if you would.
Okay, terrific. I have a bunch.
Yeah, can I ask something?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Really, I found very helpful for me, and I found I got lots of answers for the question in my mind. So the only thing regarding with the first cow paper again, so the farm sizes are not so large here in Turkey. There are some where medium size and small size dairy farms. Sometimes it is very hard to, with the dairy heifers, the first lactating dry cow heifers, and the dry cows. So sometimes we, if we are applying the negative decaf diets for the dairy cows, also we have to feed the first lactating heifers. So does, how can I say that, okay, is it good for the heifers or bad if we apply the negative diets, decaf diets for first lactating cows?
I don't think, Hudite, I don't think that's going to be bad for the heifers. I don't think that, for example, if we consider that the intake of those animals, and I'm talking about the dry period, close up or far off, doesn't matter. The intake of those animals, they're going to be a little bit different than your multiparous cows that usually they can eat more, right? So you may have a challenge or some discussions on, okay, where I'm going to target this. Because if I target to, I don't know, 14 kilos of intake, in your case in Turkey, right? So roughly 30 pounds here, your heifers are not going to get there. So usually your negative decad is going to be a little bit lower in your heifers then probably it's going to be into your cows. And then you'd have to play a little bit with the other components of your diet as well. So maybe you'd like to push your MP to 1,300 grams instead of the 12 grams, assuming you're going to have some animals in the pen that are going to be, but I don't think it's detrimental. And the only concern I would have is to make a realistic diet where the range of your intake is going to be a little bit bigger. So you really need to watch out for those eating less. Hopefully even that there's no competition, right? Where those things could be even worse. I don't see any problem.
Okay, thank you.
Phil, are you familiar with, Dr. Bonson pointed out the recent work by Jose Santos that suggests negative impacts of using decad in heifers?
I think that's I'm not sure particular what is the specific paper. I'm aware of a meta-analysis that was done where we didn't have urine pH on that. So it was pretty much the diet negative. Okay. Negative decad was this much, and then correlation with intakes and milk yield and everything else, but I didn't see urine pH there. So I would be cautious about how we interpret those results of that meta-analysis. I'm not talking about one specific paper that maybe I'm missing. Be more than happy to take a look at it.
If I can intervene, Marianne.
Yes.
Yeah, we have, I think, the same problem here in Italy with more small farms. Yeah. So I actually have some clients that has first calf heifers and pluriparous cows in the same group dry diet. I mean, and what I do is actually find an average, if I may, but I prefer, to have maybe a slightly not so negative decad, I mean, but I don't find any detrimental effect for first calf heifers. The only problem, if you would be the cost of a negative diet for those animals that probably does not really need, okay, the decad.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Elena and Hudai. It's to me very important that we do get this perspective of different areas and different production systems. So I really appreciate you offering that up. Moving to some more questions. There's just noted that potassium in straw can vary quite widely. So when you're talking about these diets that are inclusive of straw, you probably you're again coming back to the urine pH, correct, Phil?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, and I know it's hard. We just talk about the meta-analysis. I cannot just go out to papers because most of them they don't talk about the urine pH, and that's one of the things that I suggest to all researchers. Right, if you're doing negative decad, please put out there what is the urine pH you're targeting, what are the numbers that we got. So then in further meta-analysis, we could say, hey, these guys, they did -20, but actually they went to this much urine pH. So we could expect an acidification of this level on that herd, on that diet. I think that's important because, like you said, things are changing in different research projects or different farms, different forages, wheat straw, everything. Exactly. That's where I think if you keep the consistency in your cows, they were getting 1 week, they were all urine pH 5.5, 5.8, or 6. And then at some point they are getting all 6.6 or 7, something changed. So you have the opportunity to regroup. It is the wheat straw, you get a different type of straw from a different place, or it's just the forage that is coming from another field now. I think that plays a big role to go back to urine pH. And if we think about it, it's just like a few strategies that you can really measure that easy, right? I mean, if I'm feeding amino acids, or if I'm thinking control energy diet, there's not a little stick that I go behind the cow and say, oh yeah, she's doing it right. And with urine pH, we have that. So I think I wouldn't get caught up what it is, if it's 5.5 or 6 or 6.5, but it is something that you are looking after it.
Good. Thank you. Some questions. This was early on in the video. The commenter said you were using a Keenan mixer, and the published procedure for ingredients on a Keenan always requires water first. In the video, the water was added after ingredients. Is that fine? I guess.
Well, I guess all cows are alive for long years. So we didn't kill any cows yet, but yeah. So that Keenan mixer that you guys saw, it has a few years on it. I would say more than, well, I used that in my PhD. So I would say at least 8 to 10 years. That's the age. So it's whatever Keenan is doing it today, I have no idea how it is, but I understand the idea of the mesh fiber system, where it would be something when you go to the mixer, and it's something very interesting. There is actually there is a research, a paper that just came out from Drakely and Jackie, that was his master's student at that time. Now she's Jackie Borman. She's at Purdue University now, and they were comparing a vertical mixer versus the Keenan, the horizontal mixer, and there were some very interesting results there, especially on butter fat and probably how that fiber gets mixed. But whenever you're typing all your ingredients in a Keenan, you're correct. Based on some of those numbers, they would rank what are the orders that you should be adding to it. And for us, there are some complications on how to do that work in our farm, right? Would be nice to have a farm that was designed in that order. So for us, that's kind of how we mix it. But again, let's say I'm having problems or my water it's wrong, I probably would have a lot of variation on my TMR dry matter. And I think for the most part, we are getting where we want to be. So we are not that concerned with the water. But again, I would follow the system. If you're using the system, the full version, the mesh fiber that tells you the orders, and you can do that in your farm, I would follow that, and I think that has very good impact on the mixing of the TMR. And I think that's something, Marianne, that's something that I wish we could have more, but I think it starts getting beyond maybe AMTS. I don't know. I'm just a dreamer, but I would like to have, when I'm formulating my mix, right? I'm going to digress here a little bit. When I'm formulating my mix, that you can tell me, you can ask me, hey, where are you going to put that mix? Is that going to be in a commodity shed? Are you going to put that in a bag? You're going to put that in a bin? What is the angle of that bin? Just to have an idea if that mix is going to mix well. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and I think Lynn is listening, and she can determine whether that's something, you know, she'll get back to me on that.
Yeah, because I think we have some kind of, you know, different softwares that have, hey, the risk of acidosis, the risk of hypoglycemia, the risk of something, but actually whatever thing I'm putting in my mix, and I know here in our university that if I do some things to my mix, I'm going to be hammering that bean the whole time because it just doesn't flow.
Yeah.
And it seems like the pet industry, they are so advanced on that, right? And then even if we're mixing smaller particles, like we're talking about amino acids or the small amounts of things, they would be so much benefited from improving or a highlight on some of the things, the physical aspects of the mix. So
yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Next, moving to the next question. This is from Aiden. How would you adjust your targets for a Penn State shaker box if your dry cow diet is based on grass silage rather than corn silage? And I have a follow-up ponder to that once you've tackled that. I believe Aiden's in the UK.
Okay. I would start by saying in the ideal world, I would not change, right? So whatever way we are chopping, if we could chop that in the same way. And I think that's kind of almost very hard to get, right? Where you're going to have your grass haylage mix as much as you can. But I'll try to, if there are opportunities for mixes with knives or where you actually include that ingredient first and you try to mix that as much as you can to minimize that particle size. But I think all come back to an idea of sorting, right? So we know that if you have too much on the top, cows are going to sort. So I think it's trying to go back to those same guidelines. Doesn't matter what you're feeding, but now I know it's hard how you're going to get that smaller particle size. So I'll try to put, you know, the forage, mix that as much as you can with the knives in the mixer to get the smaller particle size. Then you may add other ingredients and then mix everything and see what you get, right? And that said, try to do your best there. And if you don't get the exact numbers that we are suggesting, okay, are those numbers that you're getting changing from one day to another? Maybe that's going to give your number a big reality shock. So if you have your Penn State box in the offer diet, and then you do the Penn State box again in the refusals, how much is it changing, right? Especially the bottom, because if we think it's sorting, the bottom is going to be a little bit different, right? They're going from that sweets and all that little things. Are you getting more than 10, 15% change? Then I would be worried about your numbers on the top pan because they are sorting. That's a big problem for you. So I'll try. Yeah.
Yeah. So in contemplating the use of haylage rather than corn silage, if I remember correctly, a few years ago, we had a webinar from Lance Baumgard, and he talked about somewhat of the difference that he was seeing when he went from, I think it was University of Wisconsin down to New Mexico, and he expected to see a lot more dry cow problems based on the diet, but maybe one of them was less corn based than the other. Do you have any anything to offer on any experiences that you've had or notes that you've made when a dry cow diet is based more on grass than on corn? Do you see any correlation?
Oh yeah, big time. And I think is the one of the strategies that I talk about today was this control energy diet, right? That Dr. Drakely did a lot of research on it. Gordon Jones talks about it. And those guys really pioneer all that idea. And now we did more research. If you saw some of the things related of energy and amino acids, and on those two cases, I'm using energy in a very loose term in the sense of I'm not telling you where that energy is coming from, right?
Right.
And I think that's where the confusion comes from. So if I have two diets, one in Wisconsin, one in New Mexico, to use the same example, New Mexico, I'm expecting more forages or my grass haylage. And in Wisconsin, I'm expecting a lot of corn. Actually, what I'm talking in the same energy, but one energy is coming pretty much from starch. The other one is coming from NDF and perhaps some of the sugars that I have on that forage. And so they're already different, right? So the source of energy, I think it's going to be more and more important as we move forward. Some diets may have rumen protected fat, right? Can you count on that energy? Right? I say,
Right.
hey, you should go 117 grams per megacal. And I think Dr. Van Numberg is doing a lot of things on, hey, if I use high moisture corn or corn, is there a difference? So same diet, same energy, but different fermentability of those sources. Do I have a better or worse utilization of the amino acids? And I think one thing we are going to do this year is try to explain the different sources. So if I have starch versus sugar, coming back to that molasses, right? I do think the molasses is going to be different when we talk about amino acid utilization, but we don't know yet. So yeah, I do think there's differences in having that corn-based diet or not corn-based diet. And I think all comes back to microbial protein and some other things, even to be able to use that fiber efficiently. I think we're going to learn more and more about that as we, like in our case, we know that if we feed rumen protected amino acids, but we don't have enough of those essential amino acids, mainly coming from microbial protein, you don't see those effects, right? So that microbial protein is still important.
Good, thank you. Moving to our next question, how could you expand on your comments about the incidence of rumen acidosis pre-calving?
Sure. So one of the things that, and I don't have research on that, but there is some concerns and some, some ideas that Dr. Greg Penner from Saskatchewan, from Canada, that what he's talking about when he starts measuring or having some of those rumen pH boluses in cows and measuring a little bit of that difference. So his idea is that because of that level of intake, lower than what we would have in lactation, right? And also because of the health situation of not producing milk, that some cows at some point they may be experiencing some subacute ruminal acidosis, right? And we should be worrying a little bit about buffering that diets as well, not just when the cow calves that we worry about bicarb or magnesium oxide. We should be worrying about that pre-calving as well. So I think it's something that is just starting. I'm not sure we know everything about it, but I especially I would highlight some of the data that why when we added that calcium carbonate, cows, they eat a little bit more than without that calcium, right? So in a negative decad on that experiment. And I wonder if that's true in other situations where if I add buffer or not, if cows are gonna eat more and produce better after calving. So I think that's kind of the concern, I guess, of those VFAs not being flushed out from the rumen because you don't have milk. And talking about, so it goes back to, could be one of the things why steaming up that diet, going to 20-25% starch close up would not be a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, this is a question. We now measure methionine requirements on an energy status in fresh cow diets. You take the ratio off the total MP fed. With the dry cow diet, how does that apply, considering that the diet he recommends is a controlled energy diet?
Yeah, so we use the same application, right? And again, that's what we have. We don't have a lot of information about that, right? But that's the same thing that we use. So actually the control energy diet, again, we are not feeding more and we are not feeding less of the required energy. It's just a strategy to get the cow what she needs, right? So we are good there. So we are at 100% there, or we are at 98% of that energy. So we do the same ratio of amino acids on the close-up prepartum or when the cow is lactating. I think we are still, waiting on research to say, okay, prepartum, this is what we need. In lactation, that's what I need. And it's going to be a little bit different prepartum. I think we are still understanding, yes, we do need those amino acids and how they may be playing a role in the cow's metabolism. And now we need to fine tune that. And I think as we look into sources of energy to match that, I think we're going to get to that answer as well. Say, hey, seems like prepartum, the better source of energy is sugar, is starch, or is fat. However, in the fresh period, the best source of energy is this, and that. And also, I would suggest that, you guys, nutritionists out there, and you're working with different farms, and they have different ingredients. One may have more sugar, the other one may have more fat. Try to see if you can find any connections. Say, hey, my farms that feed rumen-protected methionine and have molasses, they do better than the cows that don't. Or, we have some suspicions that maybe the diets in New Mexico, they would work worse with amino acids than the ones in Wisconsin. But there's no research that can back it up, whatever I'm talking here. So your observations, I think, are going to be very important, and voicing that so we can then look for that in some research projects and kind of try to figure that out. But as of today, we use the same thing, prepartum or postpartum. We are at the same relationship of those grams with energy.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, good suggestions to have people offer their experiences, because research is only good if it's applicable and makes sense in the field. So, any data regarding BMR versus conventional corn silage in a close-up diet? You have to fit in 11 to 12 kilograms within the dry matter intake, optimal ADF and NDF and NEL and MP. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's, we do have some experience with BMR. And one of the things, it seems like it's easier for cows to eat maybe a little bit more than what you would expect, right? And I think maybe it comes from the characterization of all those fiber components. If you have and you're using UNDF or NDFD, what are the components to characterize that fiber? I think with the BMR, what I've seen, that seems that the cows, they eat a little bit more. And then what, let's say, AMTS was predicting, but again, can be that I'm not describing that fiber because I don't have the analysis to describe that much. They eat a little bit more, and then it comes, maybe they're going to be eating more energy than what you expect. So maybe you have to balance that with a little bit of straw, right? So it's kind of a tricky situation where you have a better material, but then you have to put a bad material like wheat straw just to balance things out. But I would think it'd be kind of the same recommendations on NDF and everything else and NEL. I would stay the same, but you're gonna may get a little bit more. So if you're shooting for 60 NEL per pound, maybe you're gonna go to 61, 62, and you try to maintain that with your straw on the intake of those cows. So I don't see a problem. We are using right now BMR, but I think you need to watch out, especially the intake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am out of questions. Elena or Hudai, if you have any questions or comments.
I'm okay, actually. And thank you again, Dr. Cardoso, for the great presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, yes. Otherwise, I'm going to say to Phil, thank you so much. I'll see you tonight. And everybody who joined us, thank you for joining us. We'll get all of this process up. One more. What do you think about the large differences between results with rumen-protected amino acids? Most of the trials don't show any results in milk, but others like Baptisel 2017 show a great increase in MILS. Milk, maybe just a mistype. Yeah, milk. Thanks, Clovis.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of that's a very good point. And I think that's where, yeah, I think it's a good point. And I think it comes back to the reality of some of those diets and how well you were able to control other variations to really show what the treatment is capable of doing. So for example, that's why sometimes commercial farms, you have a lot of variation that you can't control, like blocking cows, having all the cows very similar, a lot of other things that increases the noise on trying to separate treatments, right? When you go to a research setting, usually in a university where you have everything controlled, intake every day and all that stuff, usually you're able to detect better treatment differences, right? But I think it goes back to a lot of the things that happen at that diet. And that's why I never say, whatever you trial may be showing 3 kilos difference, 4 kilos difference. I don't think it's going to be realistic that every time you feed that, you're going to get there, because just the environment is different. The forages are different. And the way you control for those differences, it's going to be very different. So it can be frustrating try to replicate things that you find. And I think I would go back to those diets on those trials, and you're going to see they are all different. In particular, I know that diet used blood meal. When I'm talking to you about the results with rumen protected lysine, we didn't use blood meal on those diets, right? So huge difference that can impact RUP, can impact your metabolizable protein right there, right? The quantity of sugar, I know sugar are a little bit higher on that trial. So some insights that you can get are of, maybe this is what's going on, right? But I think usually, in my perspective, amino acids, they have been pretty consistent in showing improvements whenever you have some of the background happening as well. So I don't think if some things in the base, if I was saying importance, if you have sorting, I don't think you're going to see effects maybe in your amino acids. If you don't have the balance with the starch and sugar, all this, I think you start minimizing the effects that you may have in the amino acids. And for sure, it's very well, or at least for me, I'm convinced that if you don't have the other essential, you're not going to have the results. If you don't have the lysine, probably your methionine is going to be limited to the responses. So a lot of those little things, I think they are important. And each trial is going to be a little bit different, the diets. but I think it's very educational, and maybe it would be something that you could put, like all trials or all papers that you have about the specific thing, could be methionine, could be lysine, and you just compare diets and see what could be the potential differences for something doing it or behaving different.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Thank you, Elena and Hudai, for joining this morning. And we'll be back this afternoon. Everybody, thank you very much. I'm going to sign out unless I get another question really fast.
Thank you,
All right.
Marianne. Thank you, Dr. Cardoso.
Thank you very much, guys.
Phil, I think I have it set up so that you can go ahead and run your video if you would like. Yes, it worked. None of the rest of us do that. We're just not courageous enough. So Phil, go ahead and unmute Paula if you'd like to say hello. And Marcos, it's so good to see you again.
I can't see Marcos. I can only see his picture.
Yeah, you just see his pictures. See in the sort of sense. Are you know Marcos?
I know Marcos. Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, we know. We come from different places here, but pretty close. Thanks again to be here, and thanks for the talk and for the invitation. Nice to see Paul again also.
Yeah, this is the good old group. Paula, do you want to start out with some questions, or would you like me to go ahead with a few that I have? I don't have a lot of questions yet.
Hi, Phil. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Paula.
Hi. It was a really great webinar. People are very excited about it, and we have questions about it. Okay, may I start, Marianne? So
yes, why don't you start? Actually, let me ask just one for a little bit of clarification, and then you go ahead with some of your questions. Undoubtedly, you'll have more to catch up with. So this is a question back when you had the slide about the low DCAD and the high calcium diets. You said you gave the abbreviation of AHS. Can you tell us what that is? What that stands for?
Let me check.
AHS, Alpha Hero Samuel. I can go to that slide if that helps.
That will help. I'm trying to get it myself. I should have it open.
Let's see. I'm trying to see what time it was. I can't tell what time it was. So it was talking about DCAD, and I kind of wondered if it was animal health score.
Oh, I got it. Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay. And in context, I think when I looked through it initially, I thought animal health score, but I didn't spell that out for anybody.
Presentation. Final. I think you're gone, I guess.
Okay. All right. But that was the correct thing.
Yeah, so that, and I'm opening my PowerPoint right here.
Right here. Slide 47.
Yeah, adverse health score.
Okay.
Yeah, so according to that reference in tiny letters over there, they kind of, and I guess it's in a way trying to get away from the small power that usually we have with these experiments, right? We are talking about 20 cows per treatment. That's usually not enough to make any conclusion in any specific disease. But, whenever you do a transition cow trial, reviewers are going to ask, hey, how about the health? So we usually inform that. That's why you see a little bit of the frequency. So 5 out of 28, 4 out of 27, not even stats on it, right? However, there's this way of, hey, let me add here some of the diseases, right? And including other edema and other things that we may not realize they may be important. And that aggregates everything into one score. So that's kind of the idea of the score. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Paula, I'm going to let you do a few questions and then we'll circle to Marcos.
Okay. Okay. The first question is from William. Which are the most important additives in pre-fresh diet when cows are eating corn stover?
Okay, so what are the important, most important additives when cows are eating corn stover prepartum? So I think that's in a way that probably trying to control the energy before calving, and since maybe there's not the reality of using wheat straw, or I think corn stover could be a pretty good one. And what I would think it goes in general for this prepartum diet when you're using this rough material to dilute the energy is first to make sure that whatever corn silage or whatever energy is there that you are diluting, it would be at the service to kind of dilute some energy that it's not there. So if your corn silage is at 15% starch, right, and you're using corn stover to dilute that energy, probably you're going to end up with too low of an energy. So I would make sure that you have quite some energy there and you're diluting with corn stover. And I think the most important thing, and I wouldn't call an additive, because you could get there with additives or without, would be making sure that you have that metabolizable protein that we talk about it, right? And in your case, microbial protein may be limited because perhaps the energy is not going to be there to digest that corn stover. So I can think about some sugar sources, maybe some sugar co-products that may be available around. Here in the Midwest, whey is a pretty interesting source of lactose, some type of sugar coming from there. There are some regions where molasses is kind of used as well as a source. Bakery waste, and some other wastes that can add some sugar to improve that fermentation of that fiber and then get you to that microbial protein so you can have that 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein. Another way would be then to use ruminant degradable protein sources like treated soybean meal or some type of product like that to make sure you get to that 1,200, right? So I would think that would be something very important to watch, and additives to that. I don't consider amino acids additives. It's just like cows need, but I would try to make sure that because of the profile of that metabolizable protein, perhaps those amino acids are going to be very much in need. And I would try to make sure you are okay with the whole potassium, right? What is your corn stover potassium? Is that changing a lot? Make sure your DCAD, if you're going for a negative DCAD before calving, that you have enough calcium and everything else after calving. So bottom line, I would really worry about just making sure fermentation is happening and those cows are good in that metabolizable protein. And actually, I'm not sure if I can ask questions, but Marcos can talk about his recently accepted paper in JDS that talks a little bit about this high-low protein and how metabolizable protein being deficient or not with amino acids, in this case, he worked with methionine, could generate, right? So I think metabolizable protein is very important. Marcos, are you going to answer or no? I'm not supposed to put you in the spot.
No, I can make a comment on that. In that trial, we increased the crude protein of the diet and also completely replaced conventional soybean meal with a bypass soybean source like soy pass. So we increased both crude protein and MP supply. And the interesting thing is the increase in dry matter intake before calving seems to be pretty consistent with amino acids. And it seems to increase insulin, also the methionine, the supplementation. And there was a good increase in milk yield post-calving too. to the increased protein supply. Like you have a decrease in dry matter intake, the requirement of the conceptus, the colostrum, it's all there. So like I think we need to concentrate that protein in the diet also because of the dry matter intake is low immediately before calving, but very promising effects, I think. Like at meta-analysis of José Santos doesn't show a big difference, but in this trial, I think we got nice results, like changing immune markers, and I think it was interesting. More milk, more intake, and the methionine now again showing some potential to increase intake before calving, to act on immune markers, and it's really, I think these are nice observations, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very important paper, and actually it's in press now, so I'm not sure if everybody can see it at the Journal of Dairy Science, but it's coming out of the press soon.
That's pretty simple, but was interesting, I think, and
Yeah,
it makes sense. Like
we'll watch for it and try to get a link up when that comes out, or at least do I could do a blog about it. Marcos, I might ask you to help.
Okay. So I'm going to make a question. Phil, like
Yes.
I listen a lot from field nutritionists, like using like these high straw diets. That a difficult thing is to maintain like a constant urine pH. It fluctuates a lot. Like probably because of sorting and some when you use an ionic salt. Sorry about that. Like when you use an ionic salt on a very high straw diet, like you get fluctuations, cause some high pH, then really low pH, suggesting that they eat one day, they don't eat the next day. So you have like a rule of thumb to control it, like adding a given amount of corn silage or a given amount of water or something to avoid sorting. Is there a rule of thumb for that? Do you think so? And do you see it also, like or not?
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think we kind of touched a little bit this morning talking about that. So I think the point is what is the target of that negative decad, and then I'm not even talking about negative decad through ammonium salts. I'm talking about you have a blend or you have a product that is proven and it doesn't hammer your intake and all that stuff, right? Then my point is then whenever we talk about this negative decad, we should be looking at, and I'll get to the straw stuff, but we should be looking at what is the target urine pH that we are looking at, right? What I've seen here is that you can have diets at -16 or -18, -20. They can have the same negative decad. However, when you go to urine pH, those are they can be different, right? There are a lot of other things, like you mentioned, could be sorting. You could be overcrowded pens that you have some competition and then you don't have cows eating the same thing. Whatever is happening, or variation in potassium on those forages, whatever it is, the final answer is going to be what is the urine pH, right? So I think that we should be looking into that. So one thing also from chemistry, nothing to do with nutrition here at this point, is that if you play around with a solution and you're trying to lower the pH of that solution and you keep adding acid, it's not a linear path, right? You're going to have that solution reducing in pH, and then you have this drop in pH and you're keeping that lower level. And I think that's translated to the farm, where what we see here with control energy diets specifically, but also without the control energy or without the straw, is that whenever I'm targeting a 5.5 pH, the range or the variation is much smaller due to this effect of pH than when I'm targeting 6 or 6.5. So I think there's something inherent to the target acidification on the cow and how easy or harder it is to keep that consistent or variation. So usually if you are targeting that 6.5, you're going to be seeing more variation just because of that, independent of anything in the diet. But
we also see that any type of sorting, and I showed you in the video and research from Trevor DeVries on saying, hey, that particle size is pretty small, you know, like it's not, without a hay buster, I don't know any mixer or any knives that can do the job that those things can do, right? So I even joke with Tom Overton, right, with the chopped straw, because it's not just the straw. I think the chopping plays a big role on that whole contribution. But we see here with straw, checking for sorting with our Penn State box and changing perhaps some timing on the mixing to adjust for that, that we can keep pretty consistent at 5.5. Now, when we do 6, we play around at, we go from 5.8, we go to 7. Cows, they just don't get to that level. I think that's kind of what we try to play. I think if some farm, that would be, I think, my suggestion. If you have farms with a lot of variation, maybe challenge them to get to a lower pH. Of course, checking for that intake, right? Not to go down.
Okay,
Can I follow
thank
that
you.
a little bit?
Sorry, Marcos?
Can I follow that a little bit because it's
Yes,
the same
please.
topic?
And yes, and then we'll let Paula ask some questions. I have a few in my window too.
Okay. Phil, on the same topic, like I found very interesting, like in your anime trial that you had just shown, like you had a minus 24 decad, actually not very negative, but you got a really low pH, around 5.5, with a low decad. Would you say that's much easier to reduce pH on high straw diet than conventional diets, probably because you have less potassium? I think in a high corn silage diet, you may have more potassium than on a straw diet, probably. I would say that most of the time. So would you say that's easier to acidify urine pH with a high straw diet than a conventional diet? Could you say that?
Huh. I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah, the minus 24. I would not expect a 5.5 with a minus 24 diet. Really, it's really.
Yeah, but
it's not
that yeah. One, Marcus, don't get caught up on that. How can I say? In the unit that I'm using, that would be like a minus 240.
Oh.
Right? Yeah, so it's pretty low, and that's where the amount that we had to go down to be able to get to that urine pH 5.5. And so usually if you go to a minus 15 or minus 150, you would be around that 6.5 usually. So when you go, and we had the potassium challenge, that's why. If you ask, why did you go minus 240? Because that was the potassium challenge we had to get to urine pH 5.5. That's how much negative we had to go.
Oh, sorry about that. For me, it was minus 24.
Yeah, but I should have kept the same meal equivalents per dry matter or just per 100 grams. That was the.
Okay, thank you.
We actually find that people are thrown by that in the program as well, just not necessarily looking at the units and thinking that it's a different decad measurement. Okay. Did you have another follow-up, Marcos, or shall I have Paula ask some questions?
I think Paula can ask. I talk later.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, Marian and Phil, I have a question related to urine pH. This is from Victor. Why are the differences in urine pH in cows coming to the pre-fresh pen, recently coming to the pre-fresh pen, with pHs of 6 to 8, being all the cows fed the same diet? And what do you recommend in those cases of different pHs in the same group?
Okay, let's see if I understand. If I didn't understand well, Paula, just correct me, okay? So the question is, in one pen where you're feeding that negative decad diet, you're having cows with urine pH 8, and you're also having cows with urine pH 6. Is that right? And how can you fix that? Is that right?
In that pen, in the pre-fresh pen. The first days eating that diet, I think.
Okay, because so that graph that I showed you, where you see a bunch of cows with high urine pH and some cow and a lot of cows with low urine pH, and then you see there's a gap there. That's what happens in a pen. So you're always going to have the cows that just came in. Perhaps it's going to take them a week or 3 days. It depends a little bit on what type of product you're using. They're going to work faster or not, right? But usually in about a week, everybody should have that urine pH dropping. And like I said, if you're controlling for everything, I would say that sorting is a big thing. I've seen farms. Next good example was in Mexico one time. They changed wheat straw to leftover of corn, like the little rounds of the cob and everything else, and cows were sorting like crazy. So of course you have a lot of cows eating the concentrate that has the DCAD, the urine pH goes low, the other cows are not eating, right? Any overcrowding, anything that there is competition could be prone for that as well. So I'll clear all these management issues, and then I would go to what is your mineral challenge with potassium, for example, and do you need to go a little bit, your target should be a little bit lower than 6. Should it be 5.8, 5.5? Then it's kind of a question, but I would make sure you're not having sorting, right? Whenever you feed that TMR, you do the Penn State box and you get your numbers. Then the other day before you feed that your cows again, that leftover, the orts, the refusals, do your Penn State box again and see what's the difference. Usually more than 15% shift or difference could be an indication that your cows are sorting. And if that's happening, that's the answer. That needs to be fixed before anything else. But I would say that's usually the number one. Something is going on that some cows are eating more of that grain mix with the DCAD, some cows are eating less.
Okay, perfect. And there, you answered another question from Francisco, how many days you need to feed anionic salts to lower the pH. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I would just
yes.
suggest talking if that is coming from a company or from a mineral mix or something, they should have some information about, how soon they expect. But I would think that after a week, everything should be working.
Okay, perfect. May I go on, Marianne?
Yes, Paula, I'm gonna, I apologize to Sean Lee. I did not see him because I had a different screen open. So we also are joined by Sean Lee from China. And after your next questions, Paula, I'll defer to Sean and see if he has any questions you would like to ask. And then I do have some in my window. So yes, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question related to dry matter intake. It's from Daniel. He says, we are listening some recommendations on dry matter intake in pre-fresh cows of about 16 to 18 kilos. What do you think the dry matter intake should be in energy controlled diet?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. And I wish we would be all in a room and we could talk about it and I could draw some stuff, but if we think about it, it's kind of hard to require some intake, right? So for example, each farm, it's so different on the way they manage, the way they handle comfort, bedding, stall sizes, heat abatement, and you name it. There are so many things that can be different farm to farm that can impact their intakes, right? I do think that's why we kind of put the recommendations under the requirements on the nutrients. How you get there, it's going to be a little bit different. So for example, when I'm telling you, hey, you need 1,200 grams of metabolizable protein in that diet, prepartum, if you get there with 12 kilos of intake or with 16 kilos of intake, that's okay for me. So I think that's kind of what we should be worried about. How many grams of some of those things that we believe are required are getting to the cow? Some farms are never going to do the 16 kilos of intake, but they can do the 12 or even 1,300 grams of MP. And just cow size, just play around. Some farms have cows at 2,000 pounds. Some farms have hosting cows at 15, 16. So how can you expect that all of them are going to be doing 16 kilos? I do think if you have less than 8 or 7 kilos per cow per day, something is wrong because the cows are not that tiny, right? So they should be making something. But I could argue that cows that are eating 10, 11, 12 kilos with control energy or not, they could be well fed, right? But if a lower intake, you may require more aggressively use sources of bypass protein, like Marco's mentioning, soy pass, soy plus. You may have to use blood meal in our case here. Maybe you can't use over there. So it gets challenging. That's where it comes the question, well, maybe I need to improve my comfort so my cows can eat more. And then I don't have to spend so much money in this concentrated diet to deliver the nutrients. So that's why I think it's very hard for me to tell you guys that it should be 16 kilos because I have healthy cows at 12, 13 kilos, but I do need to have all the nutrients there for them. I do think that farms can use, but that's a within farm type of alert where, hey, our cows are formulated to have all the nutrients into 12 kilos. If the cows start eating less than 10 kilos or 11 kilos, we need to watch out and maybe you have to reformulate the diet. I think within a farm, you can create some alarms and say, hey, we need to be eating this much. If not, we are going to be in trouble. But I find it hard to tell you, hey, cows should eat 16 kilos because they can have huge cows, you know? Does it make sense, Paula?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Sean, not to put you on the spot, do you have any questions that you would like to ask?
No, Maria, thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining us. I'm sure you'll be sharing this with your audience as well. I'm going to ask a few questions from my window. Let's see, beginning with the soybean products can play against the nutritionist by affecting the concentration of potassium in the close-up rations. Is that a problem?
Not the problem that I'm worried about. I mean, we will have potassium. It's almost like coming back to that conversation that I had about the variation and what the things that we should be worried about. And I think that variation in soybean or soybean products, they're going to be kind of minimal when compared to variation found in your corn silage, in your hay, even in your straw. We were discussing this morning that some people find a lot of variability into that straw on the potassium. So I kind of would not be worried about it.
Let's see, the oil from extruded soybean meal can be detrimental. Can it be detrimental in close-up diets?
So the oil, so you're feeding soybean oil to cows, is that right? Or you're?
I think this is from Vaccaro.
Or does that mean the oil from the extruded soybean meal? So usually that soybean meal or that extruded, we have pretty minimal oil, right? That the other industry already used that, and we are kind of left over with very little lipid in that soybean meal product or that soy bypass. We are not feeding in any way here the whole soy where you'd have all that oil to be used by the cow. So I wouldn't be worried about the lipid content of those products.
Okay.
And I think if we keep that below our recommended 5 or 6%, I think since you don't have to push energy before calving, I think that our diets usually run around 2-3% ether extract, for example. So I wouldn't be worried about that.
Okay. A few questions from Weiben. why should sulfur be 0.35 to 0.4%?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So the idea is that if we don't check for that, or if we are not aware of that, some of the limiting amino acids like methionine, it's a sulfur amino acid. So that's the idea, that we can give conditions to the rumen or to the bacteria in the rumen to synthesize amino acids and not be short on the sulfur ones. So like cysteine and others. So that's kind of the idea, to make sure we are keeping a minimum to keep the rumen bugs working and synthesizing good protein and amino acids for the cow.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the next one, can an increase in MP supply from 1,000 grams to 1,200 grams increase calf birth weight or just mitigate cow protein mobilization?
Yeah, it's kind of very interesting that we have this concept about the last third of gestation and everything is going to the calf, and then that's a problem. And I think we have that, or I remember learning that in vet school. However, I think when we talk about protein, is a little bit different, because at the same time, we can't forget that the cow is building or formulating that colostrum that is going to come, or prepping the mammary gland for lactation. So I think it's kind of very selective on that cell regeneration or regrowth, or whatever you want to call it. I think amino acids in protein are used for that. So I didn't see any research talking about increasing MP and having problems with dystocia, for example. But I do think that it can play a role in protein mobilization around calving, but that's somehow a little bit harder to detect, right? It's not like body condition score that you can tell cows are mobilizing adipose tissue. Is a little bit harder to detect. You need a little bit more tests. But I think that's where, when was it, early 2000s, that Bell proposed that, say, hey, we may need a little bit, maybe I'm getting wrong my year here, but that we need a little bit more than the 800 or 900 grams that NRC was talking at that time. Say we may need a little bit more MP.
Okay. Then I've got one last question and then a couple about pH. What is your suggestion of grouping strategy for small dairy farms to better facilitate the transition period?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's where I think the translation from the science to the field to specific cases, that's where there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think. And it's just because farms are so different, right? But I could tell you that, the book would tell you to say, you need a 4-off, you need a close-up, and you need to separate those first calf heifers, or so those heifers that are become cows in their first lactation, separate them from the cows. And then you already said in your question, hey, I have a small dairy farm. So how many cows you're going to have in that pen? So you're going to have 1 cow, there is a heifer, then you have 3 cows, that's going to be a multiparous cows, and it's going to be in that close-up, and then you may have 4 or 5 in that far-off. And then can you mix a good diet for 1 cow and another good diet for 3 cows? Sometimes you're going to have more benefit mixing 1 dry cow diet to all these animals, and just make sure through management, through gates, that there's no competition between heifers and multiparous cows. So I think, and again, we explore more that in the paper cast, talking about that idea that, hey, I'm drying my cows at 50 days, 45, I'm giving 1 dry cow diet, but now I can mix it very well because the volume it's bigger. I can make sure I have consistency, and then you just make sure to get through management that those cows are not competing, for example.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to wrap in together these 2 questions because they refer to pH. In a decad diet, what would the target for Jerseys be different than Holsteins or any other breed than Holsteins? Because probably most of the research is done with Holsteins, and then give a little discussion about how useful the pH strips are when there's a variation of 5.2 to 6.2 and you're looking for a 5.5 pH. I guess there's a challenge to that. Does that range make them useful?
Okay, so in relationship to the breeds, and I've heard that before, the jerseys, we should be targeting a lower pH when compared to Holsteins. However, to be honest, I'm not aware of that research when we are comparing to calcium and other things that we are talking about here. So I do know that, you know, jerseys, they may have more. They do have, we know, right, a whole different way of metabolize lipids. Solids are different. Steaks from them are different. So a lot of things are happening differently. And to be honest, I don't think we understand it completely. But that lipid being different, I could also expect that calcium would be different. And there is some, at least anecdotally, that Jersey cows would suffer more milk fevers, or they would have a deeper degree of milk fever. I'm not sure how much truth is into that, but I've heard before. And that could mean then that you would need a lower urine pH to prevent milk hypocalcemia after calving. I'm not aware, but I've heard. But I never saw that research comparing, right?
Okay. And the pH strips compared to, given the range that you'll get in a strip.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what is the range that is being referred to. So for example, if I look, maybe my graph here is not very well explained, right? So you see in my graph that I have a dot around 5, and then I have a dot around 5, 6. Maybe that's, or they spread on those blue dots, right? But remember, those are all different cows that they may be 3-4 days in it, or they may be more or less, right? So I think when we are trying to say if a strip or any new method is the same as the gold standard method, then we use other types of comparisons, like, for example, this linear regression and other things like on false positives, false negative. And that's where, so we'd say that the pH strips, at least these two here that we tested, right? They would explain 94% of the variation that it's happening in that thing. And that's very, very good, right? So.
Okay. All right. I'm going to let Paula loose now because I suspect she has a bunch of questions.
Yes, a couple.
Okay.
Okay, Phil, when you talk about women-protected lysine, are you talking about using commercial protected proteins to have a better lysine to methionine ratio?
Good question. So in our case, that's yes, right? But now I could come with that ratio, methionine to lysine. I could come with blood meal, right? Or I could use other sources. And I think that's a good point that we did an exercise here on the optimization, right? So if you go to AMTS and you tell AMTS, hey, I want this, calculate and figure out the cheapest way to get there. And then it can get to that ratio that we are talking about. And if rumen-protected lysine as a commercial product is cheaper than using blood meal or using soy pass or soy plus, like that source for MP, or corn, or any other sources that you may have, you're gonna decide that by optimizing and then doing the least cost. So not necessarily needs to come from a rumen-protected source.
Okay, perfect. And the last one, is from Carlos. Do you think the effect of adding methionine and lysine is because the diet is deficient or because of their relationship?
That's a very good point that I don't think we explored enough yet. But I think when we talk about the diet being deficient or not, we have to talk how are we defining that, right? Because like I just said, NRC 2001 would tell me to use 800 grams NP before calving, and I'm telling you 1200 grams. So if you ask me and your diet is 900, I'll tell you you're short. NRC is going to say you're good to go. So I think it depends on what is that concept, right? But I do think that if you plug in the numbers that you have there and you're not getting to the 1200 grams, or you're not getting to that relationship with energy, you're not getting the relationship in grams with methionine and lysine, I think there is a benefit on those two that we are understanding now, but those two can only function if you have everything else, right? And when I say everything else, I'm talking about MP, but I'm talking about branching amino acids that we didn't touch at all, that I think are important, and we are getting through this MP and making sure rumen fermentation is happening before calving. So I think when we see this effect is that, yeah, we were limited in those two amino acids. We are able to supply that. But again, what is limiting? It depends. And here are my suggestions that actually we are doing this and work on this before calving, extrapolating from lactation, right? So we do know the amount of protein in milk and everything else, and doing the relationship with energy and how better we can get that formulation. However, prepartum, I'm not sure we know a lot. We are doing this and working and seeing the differences with, without, but the amino acids, but we don't have the same information that we have for lactation cows in the prepartum. So we thought it was 3.0, the ratio. I'm not sure the ratio is that important anymore, but we do need to have those two there. And the relationship with energy, I think it's one that it's here to stay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the answer. And the last one, this is the real last one. Talking about methionine and choline, in which cases do you feed one or the other?
I see. So one big difference is that since 2001, methionine and lysine are said to be limiting amino acids for dairy cow, and they are a requirement, right? Until today, choline is not a requirement. That being said, it doesn't mean that it's not important, right? So one of the things that we have done here, it's research with, well, the methionine, we talk about it, right? So I think methionine, no question, you have to have it as a requirement. And we know that since 2001. Choline, 2001, we decided we need to understand better. We cannot make a requirement. Maybe now we're going to learn more, and the new NRC is going to tell, yeah, that's a requirement. But so far, it's not. And however, we have research here where cows were fed amino acids, right? They were formulated the diet with amino acids, so methionine was not short. And we feed restricted those cows, and we infused choline at different concentrations. And under a feed restriction period, right? So simulating perhaps what happens after calving or during the transition period where cows go in a reduced dry matter intake, or simulating what happens in overcrowded cows, or when there's much competition where some cows get a little bit hungry than other ones. What we saw was that was linear. As we added more choline, those cows produce more milk, but not in an environment where cows were all well fed. We didn't see that, right? But I think it's very clear that effect of choline when cows are under feed restriction. And I think it works or its benefits is potentialized by having methionine, the amino acids. And that actually, if you guys go back to the NRC 2001 and you read the amino acids and the choline chapter, you're going to see it, that they already said that choline may need methionine for a better function and everything else and more potential. So I think there is a use for it. And I think it's clear that if you're not getting that perfect environment where you have 80% of the stock density in your pre-calving pen, you have 100%, and you're feeding the amino acids, adding choline, I think will have benefits.
Thank you very much, Phil.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Paula and Marcos and Sean, I do not have any additional questions. Do any of you have any questions or closing comments?
Can I have one, Marian?
Yes, Marcos. Hard to hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna just have one. Phil, I think I saw in one of your slides that your forage NDF as a percentage of body weight was around 0.74, something like that. Have you been using it to formulate diets using straw? Is it a reasonable approach to define how high you go, and you shoot for something on the lower side of the number because of it's a low fiber quality product? Is it a reasonable way of defining how high you go in straw in the diet? And what would be your numbers if you have any on that?
I think that's a very, very good question. And I think one thing that at least, especially, when you're using the software, so let's say AMTS, right? So this is being predicted that the cows are going to eat, right? And I try to describe the best that I can all my ingredients, but it's far from perfect. And I don't have the UNDF 240 of my wheat straw as often as I would like, or some of those characteristics. And oftentimes, what I go through is just the physical effective NDF that is calculated in AMTS. That's kind of where I go for. And in my experience here for these diets, it's kind of a little bit the opposite. It's like we have to push a little bit the straw to get to that 21, 22 number. And you can see that usually by the intakes. Usually the intakes that we have are superior of what those cows are supposed to be getting. So let's say now we have a BMR corn silage, and I'm seeing that my straw is not enough to control that intake in the way that I think or the software is predicting. So probably I'm not defining my fibers in the BMR the way that I should have, or that the software is expecting. So usually I go there. I don't have, like you've mentioned, the 0.75% of NDF. But I think if you're going too much, you're going to limit intake. And I do think it'd be dangerous if you're formulating your diet and the software is telling your cows should be eating 28 pounds or, 14 kilos, and your cows are eating 10 kilos. I would be worried that usually you're feeding probably too much straw. In our case here, oftentimes is the opposite. My cows are eating more than what the software is predicting, and I kind of push them to get to that 21, 22 of physical effective NDF. So do you use the 0.75, Marcos?
I think it would be reasonable for me. Actually, okay. I've been using long MDF greater than 8 millimeter as a percentage of body weight, more than forage NDF. Okay, but it's not calculated like you did using just multiplying the NDF of the diet times the distribution of particles. Actually, it's predicted, like the NDF greater than 8 millimeter. I don't see any reason to look at the 4 millimeter. Okay, I shoot for the one that's higher than 8 millimeter. And there is some interesting work here from Gustavo from Piracicaba that they raised the point of even looking at the 19 millimeter. They got a response on that, I think in the Dairy Science, I think 2 months ago. And that paper suggests me that the 19 millimeter screen may have some use, like cows ruminated more when they increased the 19 millimeter without changing the total on the top two screens, the greater than 8. Okay, but I think MDF greater than 8 millimeter as a percentage of body weight, I think I like that number. It's not perfect.
So you get that number, because there's no space in AMTS for you to type that Penn State box results, right? So you do that on the side.
Yeah, I use my spreadsheet.
Oh, Marianne, you need to buy that spreadsheet. Buy the license and just put
an
add on to AMTS.
But you can probably calculate it in AMTS. The only thing is, you just need to, or you analyze the boxes. The thing is, for example, if you just multiply the NDF of the diet times the distribution of particles, that number is going to be like 4 units lower. For example, a diet with like 15% of the dry matter of NDF greater than 8 millimeter, the real number is about 21. It's much higher, because that calculation assumes that the concentration of MDF on the screens is the same. Of course it's not, especially for TMR. There's a mistake for corn silage, but for TMR the mistake is much higher. And for grasses, the mistake is not that high, because the MDF on a grass is basically the same on each screen. But for TMR, the mistake is huge. I think this number has no use, at least for me. I don't use it at all. The long MDF is predicted, or you measure. And the other thing is I think it's very difficult to shake a TMR on the Penn State separator. Particles some feeds are not easy to be done. The alfalfa haylage is probably impossible. You get all the leaves on the top screen, they don't have any effective value. So it's a complicated thing. So the long MDF actually is a prediction. And you see if it's okay by measuring the particle size of the TMR. You have a predicted size for the TMR, and you have your measured size for the TMR. If they are close together, so we assume that the predicted MDF should be close to that. But it's not a simple measurement, especially, for example, we have wet feeds, wet TMRs. Feeds get together. Corn silage, I think, is easy to use the shaker, but for TMR, I think a big variation of the measurements, just because not easy to it's not even sampling. Sampling a TMR may be a complicated thing, and shaking a TMR on a Penn State separator, I think, is even more challenging, because ingredients glue together, and the distribution of MDF on each screen is completely different. So this story of multiplying the distribution by the total MDF of the diet, I think we should stop doing it, and a lot of people have been doing it. I think it is a belly procedure. I think I can get the distribution on dry matter basis and just multiply. You are going to get Rodrigo Almeida did a nice try in Paraná looking at these numbers in farms, in a lot of farms. Jorge Henrique did that. The difference is 3-4 units, and every time we do it is this thing. So we calculate that. And I think it's interesting, like a long undigestible MDF would be even probably more interesting than like Rick Grant's proposal, like use the undigestible MDF on the long forage of the diet. Probably is a good measure also. But I don't think we will ever have a perfect measure. Just look at many numbers and choose a decision. And I think the old forage MDF is still a number. And if you consider that you have a diet with a lot of straw and corn silage only, and your straw is not good fiber, I think it's a reasonable measure, like to decide how high you go. For example, if I had alfalfa haylage, I wouldn't do that before, Kevin, because of the potassium, but I would probably go a little higher than this 0.7. I think 0.7 is in the lower end. You are not limiting the cow. I don't think I want a cow that would be regulated. I want a cow regulating intake metabolically. So the forage NDF can't be that high. For example, if she wants to eat more, I think she needs to do that. That's why I don't want like 1%, 0.9, probably too high. She would be filled with fiber. So if it's a little lower, the cow can regulate more. And as this fiber is not good, like it's bad fiber, so I would like using good sense only. I don't think these numbers will never be perfect. Like you know your feeds and you shoot for a number and look at your cows and see if it's working. But I think it's an old concept, but I think it's still useful. Like forage NDF or long NDF as a percentage of body weight, because the long ones, that's the one that's filling the cow. Like the fiber from byproducts, they don't fill the cow, like except cotton seeds. Né? But for the others, I think ground fiber doesn't do that job. Like I think we should be looking more and more for long fiber, and I think the 8 millimeter threshold is reasonable. I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many papers report. I mean, we have several of them that report Penn State box and the diet, and I mean, you could have a crack at that with some meta-analysis. Try to do it. I'm not sure if a lot of people report Penn State box.
Yeah, that's correct. Like we report the distribution on dry matter or distribution on S-fed, but it's very rare to analyze the NDF on the boxes and make the calculation.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Trevor in this Trevor work, the one that he evaluated the water on the high straw diet pre-calving, he could have calculated it, but he didn't. He used the Zibelius methodology, but we calculated it. For example, in his experiment, the long NDF was 15% of the diet, and when I calculated here, and it was 21. Okay, like for the wheat for the high straw diet. Okay, but 15 when he multiplied the NDF of the TMR by the distribution on a dry matter. And he reported the NDF of the screen. So you could make the calculation. When you make the calculation, it's much higher. It's usually 4 units more. And I think this is a really good number. Like it's very useful. Like it's not perfect. I think describing fiber is not a simple thing. And so I would look at many numbers, but I think this is a good one. At least it. And in Zebeli's meta-analysis, I think he showed that the 8 millimeter explains like intake and room and pH. Né? The 118 screen has no value, and at least for me, and I don't like the 4 millimeter also. And actually, if we have 3 boxes only, and you want to analyze the screen, it's much easier. Like I think the least you have, the best thing, because the lab cost is going to be lower. If you really want to analyze the boxes, that we have an equation, a regression that we predict the NDF on the boxes. Okay, we got a lot of for corn silage. It works for corn silage. Okay, if I get the distribution on an S-fed basis, then I can predict the NDF on the screen. So we don't need to analyze, but it's for corn silage only. Okay, but for high corn silage diets, that's a number you need to know, because like the other ingredients don't contribute, like except if you have like another forage. So, but for the other forage, you can predict easily because the NDF doesn't change a lot on the screens. You understand? Like, for example, you get a grass, a hay, or alfalfa. Like the NDF of the bottom screen is the same as the top screen, roughly. So you can just multiply directly. The problem is corn silage and TMR. TMR has no use at all, because all the concentrate goes to the pen, and all the long fiber stays on the top screen. So the composition of the screens are completely different. So this multiplication underestimate the long fiber in the diet when you, and I think it's been used too much. But you can do it in AMTS. Actually, you can do it in any program. It's not difficult. Okay, sorry. Okay. Thanks a lot, Phil, for everything.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Does anybody have, if we have no more questions, I think that we will say thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Phil, so much. It's always really a pleasure to have you as one of our speakers. Paula and Marcos and Sean, thank you for joining as well. And everybody, let's say goodbye, and we'll see you guys next month or next week if you're interested in learning more about sheep nutrition. So, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending. Yep. Bye,
Have a good
everybody.
one.